The raven arrived at dawn, drifting down from the silver sky to settle upon the gnarled perch set just outside Lord Eddard Stark's solar. Its dark eyes glimmered with urgency. Ned had been roused earlier than usual by the hurried footsteps of Maester Luwin, a scroll clutched in his hand, fresh from the bird's message tube. Still groggy from the warmth of the bed he shared with Catelyn, Ned had managed to wipe the sleep from his eyes in time to glimpse the trembling in Luwin's slender fingers. Though ravens flew often to Winterfell, rarely did messages come in the old style, sealed with golden wax, stamped by the proud lion's head of House Lannister. Ned had turned the scroll over carefully, his brow knitting in curiosity. The wax had been cracked already by Luwin, no doubt to verify authenticity and gauge how quickly the contents needed attending. Luwin's voice had carried a slight tremor when he told Ned, "It seems there's news from King's Landing. Something that concerns both you and the king." The mention of King Robert Baratheon ever brought a faint, bittersweet smile to Ned's face. Robert, his old friend, now his king, had always been a man of unbridled passions. His laughter too loud, his anger too fierce, his appetites too large. The letter, however, came not from Robert's own hand, but from someone else in the Red Keep. Someone wearing the lion's sigil. That in itself raised questions. Maester Luwin had departed then, leaving Ned alone with the missive. He read it once, carefully, taking in the formalities that preceded the main text. Words about alliances and the strengthening of old ties. Sentences referencing the bond the Starks of Winterfell had once shared with the new king, whose seat on the Iron Throne had been won through a rebellion that Ned himself had helped to spearhead. Ned recognized the meticulously wrought script of Lord Tywin Lannister, though the flavor of the lines spoke of softer hands than Tywin's. It was a letter with tidings of an event. The upcoming royal procession northward, an official parade with a new queen in tow. Robert had married not Cersei Lannister, as many had assumed in the early days after the war, but Cersei's younger sister, Celaena Lannister, a woman about whom the realm still whispered in hushed corners of keep and tavern. Ned recalled the shock that rippled across the Seven Kingdoms some years ago, when Robert's betrothal to Cersei was undone by quiet, private demands made by the Lannisters. The official story as told to the realm was that Cersei's younger sister might suit the king better, might help heal the wounds left by the rebellion, without the complicated histories that swirled around Cersei. Some said Tywin believed Celaena more malleable, easier for him to influence. Others whispered a more scandalous tale, that Robert, in his drink, had once called Cersei by the name Lyanna, and so offended her and her father that they demanded he find a different bride. There were even those in King's Landing's endless swirl of gossip who claimed Celaena was the kinder soul, the fairer sister, whose bright laughter had captured Robert's heart in a way that Cersei's refined beauty never truly did. But that was all in the past now. The fact remained that Robert Baratheon had ascended the throne and taken Celaena Lannister to wife, forging an alliance with the Lions of the Westerlands. Ned had scarcely seen Celaena, only once or twice on formal occasions. She had looked tall as her sister, though slightly more delicate of build, with lighter hair near the ends, a honeyed gold that caught the sun. Where Cersei's gaze was always sharp, Celaena seemed to wander with a soft curiosity. In the days following her marriage to Robert, word spread that Robert seemed gentler with her than rumored, that his roars of laughter in the great hall were not quite so forced. Some even believed she had softened the king's rough edges. None of that, however, fully explained the new letter or the cause for Luwin's nervousness. Ned read deeper, discovering that the king's court would be traveling to Winterfell soon. The queen, Celaena, wished to visit the north, to see for herself the land that had so shaped her husband. There was no direct mention that Robert himself would come, but it was implied. Ned felt something stir in his heart at the thought of reuniting with Robert. Their last meeting had been more than a year ago in King's Landing, when Ned had gone to pay homage and address some border disputes. Robert had embraced him like a brother and drunk half the night away, but there had been that flicker of tension in the king's eyes, the old grief that never fully abated. At times, Ned worried that the ghost of Lyanna Stark, his beloved sister, haunted Robert still. Even so, Robert was always a friend in name, if not always in presence. and Ned knew that the North should receive the king's party with all courtesy and hospitality. Ned set the letter aside and gazed out the window. The sky tinged a pale gray over the snows of the courtyard. It was nearing autumn, and the last warmth of summer was fading fast from the realm. The ravens flying overhead could sense changes in the air, just as the wolves in the forests below. There was an unease, a faint tension that always came when the king ventured far from the Red Keep. Ned knew Catelyn would be quick to see to preparations. The guest chambers would need to be warmed and readied, the kitchens notified so that sufficient stores of meat and produce could be gathered. With an entourage as large as the royal procession, there would be many to feed, cloth to be laundered, stables to be cleaned for the horses, extra grooms to be assigned. All these tasks pulled at Ned's mind, yet his thoughts kept returning to a simpler recollection. Robert as a younger man, a storm of laughter and fury standing at Ned's side on the field of battle, proud as a horned bull. How different everything seemed then. From somewhere beyond the Solar's door, Ned heard the distant sound of Rickon chasing his direwolf pup down the corridor. The child's laughter floated through the old stone halls, a reminder that life continued in Winterfell's walls, no matter how large the changes in the south. Ned closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of how Robert might have grown into fatherhood. The letter hinted that the queen traveled with a child, a little prince barely old enough to walk. The notion of Robert cradling an infant in his great arms struck Ned with both warmth and sorrow. He pictured Robert, once so wild and free, now forging a new dynasty. That was the nature of power, to perpetuate itself by blood. At breakfast, Ned shared the news with Catelyn. She listened intently, slender hands curled around a steaming cup. The crisp morning air of the hall carried the smell of spiced wine and hot bread. Robb, their eldest, was finishing a plate of eggs and salt beef, his red-brown hair tangled from a restless night's sleep. Sansa and Arya, seated to his right, paused to look up with wide eyes as Ned recited the contents of Lord Tywin's letter. The girls absorbed news of the impending royal visit differently. Sansa, ever the one for courtly romance, brimmed with excitement. Perhaps she imagined the royal caravan bringing mummas, elegant gowns, or a chance to see the legendary knights who served the king. Arya, meanwhile, narrowed her eyes as if she already dreaded the fuss and ceremony that would come with hosting Southerners. She would rather be running outdoors, practicing her balance on the walls, or slipping into the yard to watch the men train. Catelyn laid her hand on Ned's, giving it a gentle squeeze. "The king's arrival is an honor," she said softly. "I know you carry the past with you, but this is a chance to renew ties. He is your friend still, and I expect the queen will wish to know more of your role in Robert's rebellion. She's Lannister by birth, yet she married the man who overthrew the Targaryens. We can only hope she has the measure of grace her sister often lacked." Menacing, Ned thought of Cersei, her cool gaze, her subtle barbs. He wondered how different Celaena might be in truth. The courtiers swore she was gentler, though Lannisters rarely lacked ambition entirely. Still, it was his duty to open Winterfell's gates to them, to show them the hospitality of the North. And if Robert truly came, then they would share the old stories, toast to fallen comrades, and perhaps speak of the future. It was not lost on Ned that Robert had once sought a marriage alliance with the North in the days before Lyanna's death. There had been talk that uniting House Stark and House Baratheon might become reality, especially if Robert's new queen was well disposed. But that was only rumor, and Ned did not wish to dwell on it. Time passed quickly in the North. The days measured more by chores and routine than by idle speculation. Yet the word of the king's approach spread faster still. Lords from the nearby holdings began to arrive, drawn by the promise of feasting and spectacle. The blacksmith toiled from dawn until dusk, forging an array of new horseshoes and replacing the battered swords of Winterfell's garrison. Clean rushes were laid in the great hall, the hearths swept free of old ash. The steward ordered barrels of ale, mead, and fresh cider brought up from the storerooms. Catelyn oversaw the arrangement of newly woven banners, so that the direwolf of Stark would hang side by side with the black stag of Baratheon, both overshadowed by the golden lion of Lannister that must now also have a place of honor. Ned made sure to walk the ramparts each morning, standing on the ancient walls at first light to feel the chill that swept across the land. He wanted to see if the roads remained clear enough for the king's party to pass. They had been graced with an extended mildness in the weather, and so the snows had not piled up too deeply around the castle. It was on one such morning as Ned stood there in the pale sunshine that he recalled the other piece of the letter, an oblique reference to a great union soon to come. Perhaps it was no more than the typical language of House Lannister, ever so flamboyant in its pronouncements. But he could not shake the feeling that something was afoot, something that might bind the North more tightly to the Iron Throne. The day of the arrival, horns echoed beyond Winterfell's gates as watchers on the wall spotted the king's outriders. Riding at the fore were a contingent of gold-cloaked guards, their shoulders draped in the lion sigil, though some wore the crowned stag of Baratheon. A flourish of banners and shining armor announced the pageantry. Swaths of crimson and gold, black and gold, all fluttering in the cold wind. The courtyard thrummed with excitement as stableboys and knights milled about, preparing to receive the travelers. Robb, now near manhood, stood by his father's side, wearing the Stark colors with solemn pride. Arya fidgeted beside Sansa, who made a great effort to appear demure. Bran peered over the edge of a balcony, too excited to keep still. Little Rickon was held gently by old Nan, though he struggled to see the commotion. The gate swung wide, and in rode the king's procession, soldiers, guardsmen, and at last, on a tall warhorse, the king himself. Robert Baratheon had aged, that much was clear. The black hair of his youth had thinned and begun to gray at the temples, and where once he had been built like a bull, now he had grown heavier, layered with the indulgences of feasting and drink. Even so, his presence remained formidable, his booming laugh echoing as he caught sight of Ned. Dismounting with a grunt, Robert moved forward on thick legs, each step pressing footprints into the half-frozen mud of Winterfell's yard. He looked Ned up and down. "Gods, you're a sight, Ned," he roared. "Come here." He pulled Ned into a crushing embrace that was half a wrestling hold, half a genuine greeting. The Northmen standing around politely bowed their heads, but their eyes glinted with amusement at the king's informality. Robert's breath smelled of ale, though he was not so obviously drunk that morning. Ned noted the lines of worry etched around his friend's eyes, the faint sag at the corners of his mouth. Yet Robert's grin was as broad as ever when he stepped back. "Your Grace?" Ned said with a small smile, for Robert never cared for stiff formality between them. He turned then to regard the woman who followed in Robert's wake. Cloaked in fur-trimmed velvet, she rode on a smaller mare, her posture regal but not haughty. A swirl of golden hair tumbled across her shoulders as she slipped down from the saddle, one of her handmaidens hurrying forward to help. Ned saw that Celaena Lannister was indeed beautiful, but in a different manner than her older sister. She had the high cheekbones and green eyes of the Lannisters, but there was a tenderness in her gaze that Ned had never seen in Cersei's. She offered Ned a graceful curtsy. "Lord Stark, at last I meet you properly," she said. Her voice was musical, with just a hint of steel beneath. "My lord husband has spoken of you with such affection. I hope I find you and your family in good health." "Nenaperi house." Ned returned the courtesy with a short bow. "We are honored by your visit, your grace," he said, careful to keep his words measured, though something in the queen's polite expression made him think she was more genuine than he expected from a Lannister. "Winterfell is yours, for as long as you wish to grace us with your presence. My wife, Catelyn." He turned to indicate Catelyn, who stepped forward in a lovely gown of deep blue. They exchanged pleasantries, and soon the yard filled with the bustle of introductions. Robert clasped Eddard's hand once more. "I will see your family settled into the hall, but first, let me look upon them." He gazed at Robb with interest. "So you're nearly grown, are you, boy?" Robb held his ground with polite confidence. 16 years name day soon, your grace. I train in the courtyard most every day now." 16, Robert muttered. "The age for glory. I'd have you show me what you're made of, lad, in a friendly match perhaps. I'll wager you've got your father's steel in your spine." He cast an approving eye across the rest of the children. Sansa's eyes sparkled with delighted admiration. Arya bowed her head only briefly, avoiding direct eye contact with the king, who noticed but let out a chuckle. "This one has a wild streak," he said, jabbing his thumb toward Arya. "Reminds me of someone I once knew." Ned felt the old pang of sorrow in Robert's words. The memory of Lyanna hovered, unspoken but present. Queen Selena extended her hand to greet Catelyn, and their exchange was cordial enough, though there was a sense of caution, as if both women were measuring each other. Even so, Selena's smile was warm when she knelt to greet little Rickon, who gazed up at her in awe. Behind the queen, a nursemaid held a small child in her arms, the little prince, whose curly black hair was a softer echo of Robert's. The baby looked around with wide, curious eyes. "Let us go inside," Ned said quietly. "You must be weary from the journey. A hot meal awaits, and rooms have been prepared for all your party." Robert nodded eagerly. "Good, good. I'm half frozen in this blasted cold. I'll not let you keep me from your finest ale." He clapped Ned on the shoulder, his face flushed from the northern chill, or perhaps the excitement of seeing his old friend. The great hall of Winterfell roared with the bustle of men warming themselves by the fires, servants carrying in steaming platters of roasted boar, and the clamor of cups and plates. The high seat was prepared to host the king and queen. Ned and Catelyn took seats of honor beside them. Robb sat just a few chairs down, flanked by his siblings, while the visiting lords and ladies took positions along the trestle tables. The hall smelled of oak wood smoke, spiced wine, and the savory aroma of stewed vegetables. Tapestries of dire wolves and long-dead Starks looked down from the walls, silent witnesses to this gathering of southern might. Robert wasted little time in asking for wine. Catelyn had already arranged for the best casks to be brought out. A hush briefly settled as Ned rose to formally welcome them to Winterfell. He kept the speech short. "Your Grace, it gladdens our hearts to receive you and your noble queen in these halls. House Stark stands ever loyal to the crown. May this visit mark a continued friendship and the strengthening of old alliances. Winter is coming, but we pray you will feel only warmth under our roof." Dan Dawin. Cheers followed, and then Robert, never one for lengthy oration, simply lifted his cup to echo Ned's sentiment. He drained it in a single hearty swallow, then demanded a refill, raising his eyebrows in playful challenge to Ned, who merely shook his head with a knowing smile. Queen Selena sipped more delicately from her goblet, surveying the faces gathered. She conversed quietly with Catelyn, occasionally offering a kind word to Sansa, who blushed to be in such a spotlight. As the feast began, conversation swirled around the hall. Ned checked on the queen's expression, noting how she politely ate from each dish offered, but did not overindulge. She took evident delight in a thick stew of venison, praising the North's ability to prepare hearty meals. But every so often, her gaze would flicker to Robert, and there was a momentary sadness there, as if she carried her own private concerns about her husband's well-known appetites. Ned found himself thinking that this woman might be more than just a docile counterpart to Robert Storm. Under that veneer of grace, there might be an intelligent watchfulness. Toward the middle of the feast, Robert leaned over to Ned and said, "Seven hells, I've missed the honesty of this place, Ned. In King's Landing, they'll feed you 100 sweet courses, none of which fill the belly. I'm a northern man at heart, or I was. Now they call me the King of the Seven Kingdoms, but I sometimes think the throne belongs more to the realm's traditions than to me." His words were slightly slurred, though not enough to make him incoherent. "Tell me, friend, how fares the North truly? Any trouble with raiders from beyond the wall, or is that all children's tales?" Ned shook his head. "No more trouble than usual. The free folk, wildlings, as some call them, rarely come so far south now. The watchmen at Castle Black keep them at bay. The realm has been peaceful since you took the throne." Robert scoffed. "Peaceful, you say? Aye, and that's good. But even peace can wear a man down with boredom. Sometimes I miss the days of the rebellion. As strange as that may sound, better to face a foe you can see and smell than 100 little vipers in your court. But enough of that. Come, we'll speak more tomorrow quietly. For now, let the hall enjoy our presence." He turned to drain another cup, smiling broadly at Selena, who inclined her head in response. Ned suspected that Robert might have come north for more than just a casual visit, despite his easy talk. Tywin Lannister had not come in person, but a handful of Lannister bannermen were part of the retinue. Their presence alone was enough to suggest something more official, perhaps a treaty or an arrangement. The pieces were not yet clear, but Ned's instincts told him to remain watchful. After the feast, as the king's guard and the northern lords began to wander off in search of entertainment or rest, Ned escorted Robert and Celaena to the royal chambers, prepared for them near the heart of Winterfell. The corridors were lined with torches, each guttering flame casting odd shadows against the cold stone. Celaena walked with a measured stride, her hand lightly on Robert's arm, though the king seemed more than a little unsteady on his feet. Once they reached the warm chambers, Robert mumbled something about needing a quick moment to clear his head, and staggered toward a side room where a washing basin stood. Celaena offered Ned a rueful smile. "Thank you, Lord Stark," she said softly, inclining her head. "He's had quite enough wine, as I'm sure you noticed. But being back here, where he once fought and bled with you in the rebellion, it must stir much in him." She hesitated a moment, glancing at the half-closed door behind which Robert had disappeared. "He speaks of you often, with an affection so deep it might almost be longing for a simpler time." Ned weighed his words carefully. "The rebellion shaped us both, Your Grace. Robert is a good man at heart, though I know the burdens of rule weigh heavily on him, and you, coming here is no small journey. I hope you'll find Winterfell comfortable." Her smile was faint. "I've always been curious about the North. My father was never keen on his children venturing beyond the Westerlands more than needed, especially his daughters, but I insisted I must see the place that Robert once called his second home." She paused, her eyes studying Ned's face. "I remember the day I was told I would marry him. I had barely turned 18 and my sister was furious, but I thought, there is a power in forging a destiny that might bring the realm together, if done with honesty." He nodded, unsure how to respond. In truth, the mention of Cersei's fury conjured 1,000 half-remembered rumors. The older sister had been betrothed to Robert first, but it all changed abruptly, leaving half the court scandalized. Ned suspected Tywin had brokered it behind closed doors, ensuring the Lannister bond to the throne was unassailable. But looking at Celaena now, he saw no bitterness or resentment. Instead, he saw a woman trying to find her place in a world shaped by men like Robert, Tywin, and even Ned himself. Before he could speak further, the door swung open, and Robert emerged, face splashed with water, hair damp. He exhaled heavily, then clapped Ned on the back again. "Ah, that's better. I've rid myself of some of that blasted wine haze. Ned, my old friend, let's not wait too long. Tomorrow, I'd have a proper talk with you. Something important. But for tonight, let me rest." His voice was surprisingly earnest, as though the weight of what he wanted to say pressed upon him. Ned bowed his head respectfully. "As you wish, Your Grace. I'll leave you both to your rest. Winterfell is yours to command." He withdrew, leaving the king and queen in the candlelit chamber. A swirl of questions filled his mind. He suspected that come morning, Robert would reveal the reason for this grand procession, and that it might involve Ned's family more intimately than he yet realized. The next day rose bright and cold, a thin crust of frost covering the courtyard. Servants scurried about setting up for the day's events, a small hunting party for the king and a chosen few, while the queen and her ladies might tour the Godswood or remain in the great keep for quieter pursuits. Ned found Robert already awake and in the yard, leaning on a spear. Around him, a handful of knights prepared to ride out in search of game. Robert wore thick furs, and the wind ruffled his unkempt hair. When Ned approached, Robert grinned. "Sleep well, Stark. The wine was too sweet for my liking. But your hearths are as warm as I remember. I'm heading out for a bit of sport. Will you join me?" Ned glanced at the men who were to ride with him, mostly southern knights, plus a few of Ned's own guards. "If you wish it, my king, I'll gladly come." He had some reservations about leaving the queen and the rest of the royal retinue behind. But Robert clearly longed for the old camaraderie of the hunt. Thus, not an hour later, they set off through the crisp woodland that spread to the east of Winterfell. The trees stood tall, branches lightly dusted with the first hints of winter. Each horse snorted in the cold air, their hooves crunching frost-laden leaves. Robert rode at Ned's side, occasionally letting out boisterous calls for the hounds to scatter in search of a deer or boar. The knights behind them laughed and swapped stories. It felt almost like a memory from years past, Except Robert was heavier, the lines on his face more pronounced, and Ned carried the weight of fatherhood and lordship more keenly. Eventually, they dismounted near a stream, giving the horses a moment to drink. A hush fell over the company, the hounds sniffing the air for prey. Robert removed his gloves and stared at the icy trickle of water, lost in thought. Ned watched him, noticing the tension that gripped his broad shoulders. Then, without turning his head, Robert said, "You're wondering why I've truly come." Ned did not deny it. He let the moment hold its silence, trusting Robert would speak when he was ready. The king took a breath. "I once loved your sister, you know. The entire realm knows it. That love shaped much of my life. But I have a child now. And more to come, the gods willing. The queen has kindly accepted my storms, my occasional rages. She's a good woman, Ned. Better than I deserve, perhaps." He paused, turning to look Ned in the eye. "She wants our houses to be more than just old war companions. She wants us bound by blood. A marriage, Ned, between one of your children and ours." "None." Ned felt his heart skip. He had suspected something like this. The realm was accustomed to forging alliances through marriage, and the union of the Baratheon Lannister crown with the Starks would be a formidable link. The idea should not have surprised him, yet it still struck him with a sense of finality. Robert continued, "My boy is still a babe, but if the gods bless Selena with a daughter one day, or if we arrange something with one of your children, Sansa or Arya, or even Rickon, for one of the line from my side, there are ways to set the seed now, to declare an understanding that when they're older, they'll wed. Your house united with mine. Imagine it, Ned, the North and the Iron Throne joined in blood. No more divisions. We'd stand as a single, unbreakable force. And maybe in that union, we truly end the ghosts of the rebellion." And Ned thought of his daughters, especially Sansa, who loved songs of gallant princes. Yet the child Robert had now was only a year or so old. A boy named Stefan, in memory of Robert's father. There was rumor Selena might be carrying another child, though none had confirmed it. Even if the queen bore a daughter, she would be years away from marriageable age. Sansa would be nearly grown by then. The notion felt like a distant dream, or perhaps a trap. He could sense Tywin Lannister's cunning in this. If Selena was indeed pregnant, or expected to be soon, a bride from House Stark would bind the realm's might. But was this truly Robert's wish, or was it simply the queen's influence? Robert saw the hesitation in Ned's face and pressed on. "It doesn't have to be decided this instant, but Selena is earnest. She's convinced me that the realm needs healing in ways I can't provide alone. She's grown to care about the North in her own way, and she thinks forging a deeper bond would help us all." "Are you against it?" Ned shook his head slowly. "No, my king. I am not against it, only cautious. These matters are best approached with care. My children, well, they are dear to me. I only wish to see them happy." "That's all I wish too," Robert said with a weary smile. "Strange, isn't it, how we men who once rode to war now fret over children's futures. The gods do love their ironies." Just then, a horn call echoed through the trees. One of the knights pointed up a ridge, where a flash of movement betrayed a stag or perhaps a hind bounding away. Robert seized his spear, the conversation momentarily forgotten, and barked an order for the hounds to give chase. The men mounted up quickly, spurring their horses after the animal. Ned followed, forcing his mind away from the swirl of questions. They thundered through the forest, weaving between tall pines and patches of brambles. For a breathless few minutes, Ned remembered the thrill of the hunt, a simpler joy that allowed the mind to empty of all cares. The stag eluded them long enough to make sport, but eventually Robert cornered it near a rocky outcrop. He hefted his spear, a shout of triumph on his lips, and hurled it with practiced skill. It struck true, felling the beast. The horns echoing in the crisp air signaled their success. The men cheered, dismounting to inspect the fine kill. Robert stood over the fallen stag, chest heaving, a satisfied grin on his face. Ned was relieved to see that, at least for a moment, the heaviness in Robert's eyes had lifted. Once the quarry was secured, they set about preparing to bring it back to Winterfell. As the men boasted and laughed, Ned sensed that the discussion of alliances might return once they were within the castle walls. With the stag slung across a horse, they rode back through the winding trails until the familiar gray stones of Winterfell came into view. In the courtyard, Queen Selena awaited them with some of her ladies. She had changed into a simpler gown suitable for walking outside. She looked at the slain stag with a composed expression, showing neither delight nor horror. Her gaze flicked to Robert, and Ned saw a small smile form on her lips. Robert dismounted, tossing his reins to a stable boy. He did not speak of the marriage plan, not yet. Instead, he boasted to her of the size of the stag, how swift it had been, how cunning the chase. She listened, offering words of admiration for his prowess. Perhaps in private, she would coax him to speak more of their plans. Ned took his leave of them to see to some duties, letting the king's men deal with the spoils of the hunt. As the day wore on, Ned found himself drawn to the Godswood, the sacred heart of Winterfell. Beneath the ancient weirwood tree, with its carved face and red-sapped tears, Ned sought a moment's reflection. The quiet hush of the Godswood enveloped him, the soft rustle of leaves, a balm to his restless mind. He knelt before the weirwood, recalling how many Starks before him had sought guidance here. He thought of Robert's proposition, of the possibility of uniting their houses more closely. The idea had once existed in another form. Lyanna meant to wed Robert. Fate had ripped that future away, replaced it with war and bloodshed. Now fate presented another chance. But was it truly his decision to make? Sansa was still a girl, innocent and full of dreams. Arya even younger, more wild. Rickon barely out of swaddling. The notion of betrothing them off to a child still in the cradle, or yet to be born, weighed heavily on Ned's heart. He wondered if Celaena Lannister was truly so different from Cersei as to make this arrangement a positive one. He wondered if Robert, with all his burdens, would ensure the well-being of a Stark daughter in the Red Keep. If the realm was at stake, the political advantages were undeniable. For a moment Ned closed his eyes. The Godswood was silent, except for the faint trickle of water through the small brook. A raven cawed somewhere in the distance. When he emerged from the Godswood, the sky was tinted with the pale orange of late afternoon. The queen approached him, accompanied by only one lady-in-waiting. She asked if she might speak with him privately, and Ned obliged, leading her along a mossy path by the water's edge. She looked around at the towering trees, her expression thoughtful. "It is quieter here than in the south," she remarked. "The air feels cleaner. Robert told me I would find this place strange, but I see a certain beauty in it." Ned inclined his head. "The North keeps its own counsel, as we say. The land can be harsh, but it has a kind of honesty." He studied her as they strolled. She carried herself with a measured grace, yet did not appear fragile. "Did you find time to rest after your journey, Your Grace?" She nodded, pausing to let her lady-in-waiting drift a respectful distance away. "I did, though rest isn't what I seek, truly. I seek clarity. Robert told me he spoke to you about a marriage. I hope he wasn't too brash in how he put it." "Joe." Ned cleared his throat. He was forthright, which I appreciate. "But it's no small decision." Celaena's green eyes searched his face. "I would never wish to force your family's hand, but I've learned that in this realm, alliances can be undone or kept stable by such bonds. I care for Robert, and I see that he still grieves things left undone. If forging this alliance brings him some measure of peace, I would do it. But more than that, I believe the North deserves to be bound closer to the Iron Throne, on terms of mutual respect, not overshadowed by the Lannisters or any other house. You helped win the realm's freedom from the Targaryens, Lord Stark. It's only fitting that your legacy be entwined with that of the crown." He heard sincerity in her voice, but also the polished rhetoric of a Lannister. Tywin's daughter, no doubt, had been schooled in the art of persuasion. Even so, Ned could see a flicker of genuine conviction in her eyes. Perhaps she truly believed that this union was for the greater good. For a moment, he felt himself considering it more seriously. He owed it to his children, though, to ensure they were not pawns in a game of thrones. Their talk ranged from small matters, the courtesy visits Celaena would pay to local northern ladies, how she might present gifts to the Stark daughters, to the deeper subject of whether Ned would consider a formal betrothal if Celaena gave birth to a girl. Nothing was decided, but a path was being laid. He walked her back to the keep in thoughtful silence, aware that a new shape to the future was unfolding, one that might change the destiny of both houses forever. That evening, another feast took place, though less grand than the first. The meat from the stag Robert had killed was roasted over an open fire, filling the hall with its rich aroma. The queen sat next to Catelyn, and the two conversed quietly, perhaps about household matters or children. Arya sulked a bit, bored by the talk of dresses and courtly manners. Sansa glowed whenever Celaena asked her a question. At one point, the queen beckoned for the little prince to be brought in from the nursery so that the gathering might see him more closely. The child, named Stefan, after Robert's father, had the sturdy look of a Baratheon. He gazed with wide eyes at the crowd, then giggled when Robert lifted him high in the air. A hush passed over the hall as Robert, in a moment of good humor, declared that this boy was the future of the realm, a future that might one day share blood with the noble house of Stark. He said it with a booming laugh, but many in the room noted the pointedness of the statement. Some lords murmured in approval, others exchanged thoughtful glances. Ned said nothing publicly, but he felt the eyes upon him. Later, in the quiet of Ned's own chambers, Catelyn asked him pointedly, "Is that truly Robert's plan, to betroth Stefan to one of our daughters?" She looked concerned, for she loved her children deeply and had her own ideas of how their lives should unfold. Ned sighed, removing his cloak and draping it over a chair. He rested a hand on her shoulder. "It seems so. There are details yet to be worked out, and Robert mentioned the possibility of a daughter as well, if the queen bears a girl. Either way, he wants a union of our houses. I can't say I was completely surprised." "And I'm back." Catelyn lowered her gaze. Sansa would be the natural choice as the elder daughter. She's fond of the idea of royal courts, songs, and stories of gallant knights. But she's still so young. Arya. I don't think Arya would be content in the south. They both smiled a little at the thought of Arya's fierce independence. Then Catelyn's expression grew more somber. Yet how can we refuse the king? And perhaps it wouldn't be refusal at all if Sansa is open to it. She might find happiness. But we must think carefully. The Red Keep is full of intrigues. The Lannisters. She paused, glancing to the window where the moon cast its pale light. The queen does seem kinder than Cersei, but she is still of that family. Ned nodded. I know. We must be vigilant, but also practical. Robert is my friend. If we can ensure a better future for Sansa without throwing her into a nest of vipers, we owe it to her to at least consider. But we'll not decide tonight. They agreed to wait and see how events unfolded during the royal visit. There would be days yet of feasting, hunts, and councils. Perhaps they would glean more of the queen's true intentions, or see how Robert's mood fared when not buoyed by the initial excitement of arrival. For all the talk of alliances, marriages were more complicated than banners on a feast day. The fortunes of great houses could rise or fall on such decisions. Early the next morning, Ned went about the castle, speaking with the stewards, organizing provisions for the extended stay of the royal party. He ensured the watch kept an eye on the roads, for ravens had brought news of roving bandits further south, though such troubles rarely made it near Winterfell. As he crossed the courtyard, he saw Robb in the practice yard, sparring with some of the king's knights under the watchful eye of Sir Roderick Castle. Robert stood at the fence, roaring encouragement, while Celaena and a few ladies observed from a distance. Robb held his own surprisingly well, exchanging blows in a controlled dance of wooden swords. The southern knights did not underestimate him for long. His northern skill, combined with youth and vigor, was enough to make a respectable showing. When Robb managed to land a decisive tap against a knight's side, Robert let out a hearty laugh. "Well done, lad. This one has the wolf's bite in him." He turned to Celaena, proudly gesturing at Robb as if to say, "See what sort of men the North produces?" Celaena offered an approving nod, clearly impressed. Ned felt a small surge of paternal pride. At the end of the session, Robb stood panting, face flushed but grinning. The knights clapped him on the shoulder, offering respectful praise. One or two rubbed bruises on their ribs, wincing good-naturedly. Robert waved Robb over. "You've got strength and skill. Do you train every day?" Robb nodded. "Yes, Your Grace. Sir Roderick is thorough." Robert gave Sir Roderick a grin. "He's doing well by you, that's plain. Mark me, boy. If I were 20 years younger and half as heavy, I'd challenge you to a match." Robb dipped his head respectfully, and Ned saw that flicker of eagerness in his son's eyes. His boy was blossoming into manhood, and he wanted so desperately to be taken seriously by kings and lords alike. Ned left them to their talk and made his way to the library tower, where Maester Lewin kept the accounts of the household. He found Lewin seated at a table strewn with ledgers, carefully counting expenditures for the ongoing feast. The old Maester looked up with mild relief when Ned entered. "My lord, the sums are quite large, but manageable given your stores. The presence of the king. It does require more than the usual. Are you certain the royal party won't be departing soon?" Ned shook his head. "No. They may stay another week or more. The Queen wants to see more of the north, I gather. She mentioned a visit to the nearby villages. Robert is also enjoying the respite from King's Landing." He paused, stepping closer so that the light of the narrow window shone on the ledger. "You recall the letter that came with the king's approach, Lewin? The part about a great union soon to come. Have you heard any rumors among the lords and ladies who traveled with the Queen?" "No." Lewin pursed his lips. "I have heard scattered talk that suggests a betrothal. Some name Sansa as the likely candidate. Others whisper that the Queen might bear a girl soon. There is speculation, my lord, that the Lannisters want more than just a distant tie. They want your house fully intertwined with theirs. If that ensures the loyalty of the North, it cements the throne's power, especially if, in the future, there are any who might challenge the Baratheon line." "Then Ned exhaled slowly, troubled by how the rumor mill churned. "I suspected as much. Speak no more of it just yet, Lewin. Let us keep our counsel until we know more. But keep your ears open for any sign of discontent or subtle manipulations from the Lannister bannermen." Lewin gave a measured bow of his head, returning to his figures as Ned departed. The corridors were alive with the movement of courtiers, guards, and servants, ferrying trays of bread, ale, and hot soup. Ned passed by a small cluster of southern ladies, giggling at the sight of a direwolf pup padding after Bran, who was chasing it with childlike glee. They stared in fascination, for direwolves were rare in the south, little more than legends. Outside, the sky hung low, heavy with clouds. There was a chance of light snow later, which would be a novelty for some of the southerners. Ned found his gaze drifting to the battlements, recalling how swiftly winter could tighten its grip. Perhaps the Queen and her retinue did not fully appreciate how quickly travel could become treacherous if the snows deepened. But for now, the weather held, and the courtyard remained a bustle. As evening approached, Ned found himself summoned by Robert to a private supper in a smaller room adjoining the Great Hall. Only a handful of people were present. Robert, Selena, Ned, Catelyn, and Sir Barristan Selmy, who had accompanied the royal party to provide counsel and to watch over the king's safety. The atmosphere felt more intimate, the fire crackling in a small hearth. The table set with simple but fine dishes. Selena gestured for Ned and Catelyn to sit across from her, with Robert at the head. Robert was more subdued than usual, sipping from a goblet of strong wine but not guzzling it. He traded some pleasant conversation with Sir Barristan about the day's events, praising Robb's swordsmanship. Eventually, though, the discussion circled back to the matter of alliances. Selena spoke gently, eyes flicking between Ned and Catelyn. "We wonder if you have given more thought to the possibility of a betrothal. Robert and I wish to make it plain that we do not seek to pressure you. But if you are open to the idea, we would like to consider formalizing it before we depart Winterfell. A letter of intention, at least, a ceremony witnessed by the lords present." Robert set his goblet down. "We'd have the North's blessing, old friend. And think of it, your daughter Sansa, and perhaps my boy Stefan. They're young now, but in a few years, they could be formally betrothed, with a wedding to follow when they're both of proper age." And me. Ned felt Catelyn's hand under the table, resting on his knee, a silent assurance. He cleared his throat. Sansa is thrilled by your presence, your graces, but she is scarcely 11. Such a betrothal would not come to fruition for many years. Are you certain you wish to tie the realm's future to a match whose outcome cannot be known? Celaena's tone was soft but sure. In these uncertain times, we build for the future. I understand your concerns, but if we wait until they're both grown, the alliance might be lost to shifting politics. I would rather see it secured now, so that our houses grow together from this day forth, not as strangers who meet on a wedding day. Catelyn spoke then, her voice calm. We must of course discuss this with Sansa, to ensure it is not against her will. But I do not believe she would be opposed. She fancies stories of princes and princesses. And if it is your wish— She paused, exchanging a look with Ned. Lord Stark and I will give it the utmost consideration. Robert's face broke into a relieved grin. That's all I ask, truly. If the girl says no, I won't force it. But I'm betting she'll say yes if she has the heart of a dreamer. He laughed, patting Celaena's hand. And we can protect her at court. See, she's treated well. She'd be a future queen, after all. Ned heard the note of finality in Robert's voice. There was a sense that the decision had been made in the king's mind already. Now it was only a matter of formalities. Ned's gaze flicked to Sir Barristan, who watched with a neutral, polite expression. The King's Guard rarely interjected in such personal negotiations, but he was a witness nonetheless. When the supper concluded, Celaena rose and dipped her head graciously. Thank you, Lord and Lady Stark, for hearing us. I hope this will mark a new chapter in the friendship of our houses. She left with Robert, leaning lightly on his arm, their forms disappearing down the corridor to their private chambers. In the flickering quiet, Ned looked at Catelyn. She seemed thoughtful, a faint crease between her brows. We should speak to Sansa tomorrow, she said softly. We cannot decide for her without at least hearing her heart. Ned agreed. He felt the tide pulling them toward a future that had once been dashed by tragedy. Now, in a twist of fate, perhaps the Starks and Baratheons would unite in a way that might stand unshaken for generations, assuming the realm did not tear itself apart first. The ghost of Lyanna's memory loomed in the shadows. But maybe this was a chance to let that wound finally heal. He escorted Catelyn back to their bedchamber, both of them weighed by the knowledge that a simple yes or no might alter the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. The wind howled outside, and Ned felt an old stirring in his bones. Winter was coming, as it always did. Alliances were fragile. Friendships could turn. But for now, Robert was here under his roof, seeking to bind them closer. Perhaps that was a cause for hope. Night settled over Winterfell, the sky studded with distant stars. In the courtyard, the direwolves prowled, sniffing the cold air. Servants huddled near torches, talking of the king's open-handed generosity and the queen's gentle grace. None knew what the future held, only that the union of House Stark and House Baratheon, shaped by Lannister ambitions, might be the grand design. Eddard Stark lay awake long after Catelyn drifted into slumber, his thoughts on Robert's boisterous laughter, Celaena's measured poise, and the sweet dreams of Sansa, who might one day be a queen in King's Landing. He closed his eyes at last, letting the distant cries of a lone direwolf lull him. The wind rattled the shutters, whispering half-remembered promises of the past and half-formed visions of the future. But for now, in the silent keep of Winterfell, the king and queen rested beneath the Stark roof, heralding a change that would echo through every hall, from the cold north to the sunlit spires of the south. Kya. Ned stirred in his bed while the first threads of dawn spread across the sky. A pale, watery light seeped through the cracks in the shutters. The night's rest had been fitful. Shadows of old memories flickered in his dreams, leaving him unsettled in the quiet hours. At his side, Catelyn still slept, her breathing soft and even. He took a moment to watch her, recalling how her gentle presence had anchored him through countless storms. Today promised to bring another such test. Their talk with Sansa about the proposed betrothal, which might well reshape the fate of House Stark. Pulling himself free of the bed's warm embrace, he dressed in silence, a simple tunic, dark breeches, sturdy boots. The corridor beyond the bedchamber felt cold enough to nip at his cheeks, though the day was not as bitter as winter at its fiercest. Stepping toward the window, Ned peered over the courtyard. A few of the king's retinue were already stirring, yawning as they stumbled toward the kitchens in search of a hot meal. A pair of gold-cloaked guards stood watch near the main doors, their breath steaming in the chill air. In the distance, Ned spotted the pale silhouette of the Master's Tower, where Maester Luwin might be finishing some letter or record. By candlelight, he made his way downstairs, footsteps echoing on stone. The great hall sat largely empty at this hour, though a handful of servants rushed about with cleaning rags and brooms, clearing the remnants of last night's smaller feast. The scents of pine resin and old mead lingered in the broad space. Ned had offered them a polite nod and continued to the courtyard, hoping the sharpness of morning would clear his head. Outside, the sky arched gray and white. A light dusting of snow had fallen overnight, just enough to powder the stones underfoot. As Ned passed, a stable boy emerged from the stables, leading a stout, chestnut horse. The boy smiled shyly, gave a courteous bow, and led the animal away. Ned inhaled deeply, letting the crisp air fill his lungs. Despite the uncertain tension of Robert's visit, he found comfort in the familiar rhythms of Winterfell. At the far edge of the yard, the clang of metal drew his attention. Sir Roderick Castle was there, instructing two young squires, one from the king's party, the other from among Winterfell's ranks. Their practiced swords met in ringing arcs, each echo bouncing off the walls. Robb stood to one side, watching, occasionally calling out a suggestion, or stepping in to demonstrate a posture. Seeing his son so earnest in guiding the younger lads tugged at Ned's heart. Robb was on the threshold of manhood, eager to prove himself, yet also learning the patience required to lead. Ned approached, and Sir Roderick looked over with a nod of respect. "Good morning, my lord," Sir Roderick greeted in a raspy voice. "I trust you rested well." "As well as one can," Ned replied. "It seems you're training bright and early." Roderick shrugged. "Idle hands lead to sloppy swordsmanship. The squires were wide awake, so I thought we'd make use of the daylight. Robb here was too restless to stay abed, so he joined us." Robb flashed his father a quick, boyish grin. "Good morning, father. Have you come to best me with the blade, or simply to observe?" Ned shook his head with a faint smile. "Observe for now. By the looks of it, you could teach me a thing or two. But I have other duties that call this day. One of which, I regret to say, is a meeting with your sister. Shall need to hear of the matter we've discussed." Robb's expression grew solemn. Sansa. Power. The betrothal. Dust. Word travels quickly, Ned said. But she should hear it plainly from us. He glanced at Sir Roderick. "If you hear talk among the men, try to keep it measured. This is a delicate issue." Roderick inclined his head in understanding. "Of course, my lord." Ned gave Robb's shoulder a reassuring pat and moved along. He knew Sansa tended to rise a bit later than Arya. Arya liked to slip out early, to do gods knew what mischief. Sansa, on the other hand, might spend extra time brushing her hair, daydreaming about knights and ladies. Ned suspected, though, that Sansa might already be up in anticipation of seeing the Queen's ladies, or hearing any news of the day's activities. As he strode toward the family's private quarters, his thoughts flicked back to Robert's conversation. He wondered how best to phrase this proposal to Sansa. How to make her see the gravity of what being betrothed to a prince entailed. It wasn't some airy romance from a song. It was a lifelong commitment, a sacrifice of sorts, and it would come with the burdens of court life in King's Landing, far from the north. Yet he knew Sansa's heart was tender for such stories of gallantry, and part of her might be delighted at the prospect. He hoped she would also grasp the seriousness of it. At the threshold of Sansa's room, he found the door ajar. Soft voices drifted out. Sansa talking with Arya, who must have wandered in from her usual morning escapades. Ned paused to listen, picking up bits of their chatter. Sansa sounded excited, Arya impatient. Something about the Queen's gowns. The conversation died abruptly when Arya spotted Ned's shadow on the floor. He stepped in, clearing his throat lightly. "Good morning, girls." They both turned. Sansa was perched on a cushioned seat by the window, her hair meticulously brushed until it shone like polished copper. She wore a cream-colored dress with embroidered flowers at the collar. Arya stood beside her, wearing a more practical dark tunic and leggings, her hair braided loosely, one side threatening to unravel. Their expressions were as different as night and day. Sansa's polite curiosity, Arya's wary, half-challenging stare. "Father," Sansa said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Is something the matter?" Ned gestured to Arya. "Would you let me speak to your sister alone, Arya? There's a matter I must discuss with her." Arya's gaze flicked between Ned and Sansa. She seemed on the verge of protest. But something in Ned's tone told her not to push. She shrugged, cast a quick glance at Sansa, and said, "Fine, but if you're telling her secrets about some feast, don't blame me when I find out anyway." With that, she stomped toward the door. When she was gone, Ned closed the door softly. Sansa's face grew more serious. "Father," she repeated, voice quieter now, perhaps sensing the tension in his posture. He stepped closer, taking a chair opposite her. The morning light played across the rugs and tapestries in the small solar attached to her chamber. He noticed an embroidery frame near Sansa's seat, half finished with a design of a direwolf amid flowers. It struck him how much Sansa yearned to stitch her northern heritage into something lovely. He cleared his throat. "I'd like to talk to you about something the king and queen have proposed. It concerns you, and Prince Stefan." Her face lit up at the mention of the little prince. Sansa had spoken with the queen's handmaids about him. How adorable he was. How sweetly he gurgled at the high table. But Ned saw no realization yet of where this was headed. "Oh yes. The queen has spoken to me a bit of him. He's quite a darling child." Ned folded his hands. "They have asked whether we would consider a formal betrothal between you and the prince once he's older. If we accept, you would be promised to marry him in the years to come." Sansa's lips parted. A breath caught in her throat. She stared at Ned, eyes wide as though seeing a dream come to life. "Am married?" Her cheeks flushed. "To the prince? Truly?" He braced himself. "Yes. The king and queen seek to bind our houses. They feel this would strengthen the bond between the North and the Iron Throne, and in time you would become a princess. Possibly a queen, if he inherits the throne after King Robert." Her hands trembled in her lap. He saw a swirl of excitement and fear flicker across her face. She tried to gather herself, smoothing the folds of her dress. I've always loved stories of gallant princes and gracious queens. To imagine that could be me. But Prince Stefan is just a baby. It's so strange to think of marrying someone so young." "And?" Ned nodded gently. "Hell grow. You both will. No one is talking of wedding you off tomorrow. It would be years yet. But once a betrothal is signed, it's a binding promise. You'd be expected to journey south, perhaps in a year or two, to learn the ways of the court, to prepare for life as a royal consort." He paused, meeting her gaze. "This is not merely a song, Sansa. It's real. The crown is a heavy weight, even for the strong. And you must think carefully if you can bear it." "Nenetin." She exhaled, eyes brimming with 1,000 hopes and worries. I would be far from home. From you, from mother, from my brothers and sister, Torito Wine." The notion seemed to settle in her heart, tempering her excitement. She swallowed. "But to be a part of the royal family, father, it's like a dream. People will say how Stark is blessed. I want to do what's best for our family, for the realm." Ned reached over and took her hand in his. "You are kind-hearted, Sansa. I see your love of stories, and your desire to bring honor to the North. But remember this. If you accept, you cannot simply undo it later. We will support you, always, and will not force you if your heart rebels. But think well on it before you give your answer." "Bando." She nodded slowly, looking down at their joined hands. Her voice came softer then. "What does Mother say? Does she approve? She wants your happiness above all. She worries for you, as any mother would. Court life can be harsh. But the Queen seems different from her sister. Celaena Lannister is not so cold as Cersei was rumored to be. And the king, well, he is Robert, a man of great appetites and loud laughter, but with a good heart beneath. We think you could do well if you choose this path. Nah. Sansa's eyes lifted, shimmering with tears that threatened to spill, though her expression was not purely sad. Then I suppose I should at least meet with the queen, speak with her about it. I'd like to know more about what my life would be. May I do that? Of course, Ned said. She's mentioned wanting to speak with you in private. I will arrange it. Take your time, though. The king and queen will remain here for some days yet. No one expects you to answer tonight. Mentioned. She set her jaw with a resolve that belied her years. I'll do this for us, for House Stark. But also because I want to believe that the songs can be real, that we can bring some measure of peace and hope to the realm. If the North and the South unite in love, maybe there will be fewer wars. Her innocence tugged at Ned's chest. He knew how quickly illusions could shatter in the pit of Southern politics. Yet he also saw in Sansa the precious determination that might help her endure. I'll let you compose your thoughts then. Arya will be less than pleased, I'm sure, but that's her nature. Mudnetty. At the mention of Arya, Sansa's mouth quirked in a half-smile. She'll say I'm chasing songs instead of seeing reality. But I cannot help who I am any more than she can help being wild. Ned rose, pressing a soft kiss to the top of her head. Take the morning for yourself. I'll tell your mother you're thinking it over. We love you, Sansa. After he left, he lingered by the door a moment, hearing Sansa let out a shaky exhale. He thought of how she was only 11, still a child in so many ways. But in this world, children were often thrust into adult burdens. He only prayed she would remain unbroken by them. The corridor felt cooler to him than before. He made his way down to the hall, finding a small group of lords conversing near the hearth, some from the north, a couple from the west who had come as part of the queen's retinue. They bowed respectfully to Ned as he passed, and he offered a cordial nod in return. Through snippets of their talk, he heard mention of the rumored betrothal. Rumor was swirling around Winterfell like wind-driven snow, unstoppable and swift. At midday, Ned joined Robert and the Queen in the Great Hall for a simple lunch of warm bread, salted fish, and mulled wine. Catelyn was there, along with a handful of other northern lords. The talk hovered around the previous day's hunt, the state of the roads leading north to the Wall, and the storied crypts beneath Winterfell. Robert had once confessed a morbid curiosity about those ancient tombs. He was both intrigued and uneasy about them. But the Queen showed more interest in the living legacy of the North, its traditions, fealty structures, and the disposition of various bannermen. They were halfway through the meal when Celaena, with a careful glance, said, "Lord Stark, I hope you've had an opportunity to speak with your daughter." Ned placed his cup on the table and nodded. "Yes, Your Grace. Sansa is a thoughtful girl. She understands the weight of what's being asked. She wishes to discuss the details with you, if you're agreeable." Celaena smiled, a gracious tilt of her head. "I am very much agreeable. Perhaps this afternoon, if she's free, we might walk in the Godswood together. I've been wanting to see more of it, and a private stroll might help me know your daughter better." "Now," Catelyn spoke then, her voice gentle. "We'll arrange it. She would be honored." Robert, seated at Celaena's right, gave a small grunt of approval and turned his attention to his trencher of bread. He seemed slightly subdued today, less boisterous than usual, though not unkind. Ned wondered if the tension of forging alliances weighed on him as much as it did on them. Or perhaps the memory of Lyanna Stark haunted him anew, reminding him of what once was and what would now be. Shortly after the meal, Celaena rose, beckoning to one of her ladies, a fair-haired girl of about 20 named Eleanor Hill, said to be a distant cousin of the Lannisters, and made her way out of the hall. Ned took that as his cue to find Sansa and inform her that the Queen was ready for their meeting in the Godswood. He found his daughter in her chamber, fussing nervously with her hair in the mirror. She wore a pale blue cloak lined with soft fur, likely borrowed from her mother's stores. At Ned's knock, she turned, eyes full of trepidation. When he told her the Queen awaited, she nodded, squared her shoulders, and followed him. They walked through Winterfell's winding corridors until they reached the side gate that led to the Godswood. The hush of this sacred space enveloped them at once, the towering trees with rust-red leaves blocking out much of the mid-afternoon sun. A light snowfall drifted between the branches. Here, the stone paths were dusted white, the air sharp with the scent of pine and water. Celaena Lannister stood near a small pool that reflected the weirwood's knotted face, the tree's carved features forever weeping crimson-sap tears. Two guards stood at a respectful distance, clearly uncomfortable in these solemn northern grounds. Eleanor Hill hovered nearby. Celaena noticed their approach and smiled, motioning for the guards to keep their distance. Ned escorted Sansa forward, then stopped a few paces away, giving them space but remaining within sight. Sansa stepped tentatively toward the queen and curtsied, a flush on her cheeks. Celaena reached out and gently touched the girl's hand. "Sansa," the queen said in a soothing tone, "thank you for meeting me. Shall we walk a bit?" Sansa nodded, and they moved in tandem along the narrow path that circled the black pool. Eleanor followed at a polite distance. Ned watched for a moment, resisting the urge to hover. He retreated enough to let them talk without feeling his presence loom over them. He found a small bench of stone set beneath a mossy oak. The hush of the godswood magnified every footstep, every rustle of leaves. In the corner of his vision, he saw the bright swirl of Celaena's red-gold cloak and the softer blue of Sansa's as they strolled. Their voices were low, carrying only fragments on the still air. Celaena spoke in gentle, measured phrases. Sansa responded quietly, her head bowed at times. Occasionally the queen paused to gesture at a gnarled tree or a scattering of pale blossoms that clung to an evergreen shrub. Ned watched as Celaena angled her face toward Sansa in a kindly way, as though trying to draw out the girl's thoughts. He wondered what Celaena might say to reassure Sansa. Perhaps she would speak of the joys of court, of the bright gatherings and the intricate fashions. Or maybe she would caution her about the intrigues, the manipulations that lurked behind every tapestry in the Red Keep. For Sansa's sake, Ned hoped the queen would not paint too rosy a picture, that illusions would break too harshly if Sansa discovered court was not always a place of gleaming knights and adoring subjects. Time slipped by, measured in the slow swirl of snow. At length, Sansa and Celaena returned to where Ned stood. Sansa's cheeks were rosy, not only from the cold, but from the swirl of emotions inside her. Celaena gave Ned a nod, then glanced at Eleanor. "Would you mind giving Lord Stark and me a moment with Sansa, dear Eleanor?" The lady-in-waiting bowed and stepped aside. Celaena's voice held warmth as she addressed Ned. "Your daughter is a treasure. She speaks so earnestly of her love for her family and the North. I've told her a little of what it's like in King's Landing, but words can only do so much. I believe Sansa has a heart that will flourish wherever she's planted, if given proper care." Number 1. Sansa bit her lip, but smiled timidly at the praise. Ned nodded in gratitude. "I'm pleased to hear you find her so." Celaena extended a gloved hand to rest lightly on Sansa's shoulder. "I told her that if she chooses to accept this betrothal, I will do everything in my power to ensure she's treated with respect at court. She will have the best tutors, the gentlest ladies to guide her, and I truly hope she'll come to see me not just as her queen, but as a friendly ally in that unfamiliar place." Madame Trey. Sansa looked up, her eyes shining with a mixture of nerves and excitement. "Thank you, Your Grace. I know it's a great honor. Father, I think I would like to do this." She turned to Ned fully then, voice trembling slightly. "I still feel frightened about leaving home, about being so far from all of you, but if this is the will of the king and the queen, and if it's best for House Stark, I will not shirk from it. I want to be brave." Ned felt his chest tighten. He saw in her gaze the same determination he once saw in Lyanna, albeit gentler. "Then if that is your will, Sansa, I will speak with your mother and confirm it to the king. There is no shame in fear. Courage is acting despite it." Celaena nodded approvingly. "The official documents can be drawn up. A formal declaration might be made in the Great Hall. It will mark a bright day for the realm." They all paused, letting the gravity of the moment settle. The white hush of the godswood seemed to hold its breath. Ned glanced at the carved face of the weirwood, silent witness to 1,000 vows over the centuries. Now it would bear witness to a vow that might shape the destiny of the realm in a time of uncertain peace. Within the hour, Ned and Sansa returned to the keep, while Celaena took her leave to speak with Robert. By that time, the sun was dipping westward, painting the battlements in a subdued gold. Servants bustled about, lighting torches for the impending dusk. Winterfell felt alive with rumor. The king was in a good mood, swirling a goblet of mulled wine as he recounted his hunting stories in the smaller council chamber. The queen had parted from him briefly, but would rejoin soon. Meanwhile, Ned guided Sansa to find Catelyn. They located her in the solar with Maester Luwin, reviewing the week's accounts. Catelyn smiled in welcome, though Ned saw the worry behind her eyes. He explained quietly that Sansa had decided to agree to the betrothal. Sansa, standing beside him, nodded, her expression earnest. The relief on Catelyn's face was fleeting. She reached out and drew Sansa into a gentle hug, brushing a hand over the girl's auburn locks. "Oh, my sweet girl," she murmured. "You're so brave. I'll do whatever I can to see you safe, I promise." Sansa's voice wavered. "I know, Mother, and I'm excited, truly. It's just all so sudden." A short laugh escaped her, tinged with nerves. "I hope I don't disappoint them." Catelyn pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "You won't. You have your father's honor and your mother's sense. Or so I hope. When the time comes, you'll make us proud." "Enan." Ned waited until they drew apart, then turned to Maester Luwin. "Would you prepare a formal letter of acceptance? Something that can be countersigned by the king and queen, announcing the betrothal between Sansa Stark and Prince Steffon Baratheon. We shall store a copy in Winterfell's records, and a raven can bear the news to the Vale, the Riverlands, the Westerlands, so all might know." Luwin inclined his head. "Once, my lord. I shall do it with the utmost care." Sansa hesitated. "Does it need to be so public right away?" Catelyn smoothed Sansa's hair gently. "It's customary, dear. Once this is made official, many lords and ladies from across the realm will want to send their congratulations or come forward, seeking alliances of their own. This is a significant match." Sansa nodded, her hands twisting in the fabric of her cloak. Ned could see the mixture of pride and anxiety swirling in her. In that moment, he wished he could shield her from the complexities of southern life. But even in the north, alliances were seldom purely personal. War and politics had shaped Westeros for generations, and new unions were a cause for both celebration and maneuvering. A short time later, a messenger arrived from the king, requesting that Ned and Catelyn join him and the queen in the Great Hall at dusk. Ned anticipated an official announcement, or at least the beginning of formalities. With a calm voice, he told Sansa to compose herself, perhaps to change into something she found comfortable. He and Catelyn would go on ahead. As he walked through the corridors with Catelyn, Ned felt a surge of memories. Robert's heartbreak after Lyanna, the battles they had fought side by side, the nights they camped in harsh conditions, the triumph at the Trident. It seemed surreal that now they were uniting their families by blood in a far more peaceful manner. Catelyn slipped her arm through his, sensing his mood. "We always knew Sansa's marriage might be a matter of politics, didn't we?" she whispered. He gave a rueful nod. "I'd hoped she might at least be older before such decisions came. But yes, it was never likely she'd wed some obscure northern lord. The realm is what it is. Dam twins." They reached the great hall, its high-vaulted ceilings illuminated by dozens of torches. The dais was set with 4 chairs, for Robert, Celaena, Ned, and Catelyn. Already, a small gathering had assembled. Noblemen, the king's knights, ladies from the south. Even a few curious northern guards had found vantage points near the pillars. Robert stood off to one side, speaking with Celaena in hushed tones. When he saw Ned, he lifted a thick arm in greeting. "Ah, Ned. Good. What?" His tone carried that forced lightness that meant he was trying to mask deeper emotions. "We thought we might do the official bit this evening. No need for a grand feast yet. Just a short announcement that our houses will be bound. We can host a celebration in a day or two, once the letters have been sent." Ned bowed his head. "As you wish, Your Grace. Sansa is preparing herself." Catelyn curtsied, her expression calm. We'll stand beside you as you speak." Robert waved a dismissive hand. Yes, I'll keep it short. Too much pomp bores me. But I can't deny it's a momentous thing." He glanced at Celaena, who nodded, her eyes glinting in the torchlight. "Shall we wait for the girl, or begin now?" Just then, the doors at the far end of the hall swung open. Sansa entered, head held high, a slight tremor in her steps. She wore a gown of pale gray with a silver direwolf pin at her collar, a symbol of House Stark. Her hair had been braided intricately with ribbons of white. Behind her came Arya, stone-faced, and Bran, walking carefully beside Rickon, who clutched at Bran's tunic. Robb was there as well, quietly guiding them into a row near the front. The hall stilled. Robert took Celaena's hand, and they moved to the center of the dais. Ned and Catelyn followed. A herald tapped his staff against the stones, calling for attention. Robert cleared his throat, scanning the gathered faces. There were fewer men in the room than at the feasts, but all wore an air of expectancy. "Lords and ladies," Robert began, his voice resonating through the hall. "I come before you with the Queen, my wife Celaena, and with Lord and Lady Stark. We have good tidings. The realm knows the bond I share with Eddard Stark, my old friend, my comrade in arms. We have spilled blood together, and now, by the gods' good graces, we spill wine in peacetime. And we wish to strengthen this bond through our children. Menetstei." He paused to let the hush deepen, then continued, "It is my pleasure to announce that we intend to betroth my heir, Prince Steffon Baratheon, to Sansa Stark. The betrothal is to be sealed by the laws of gods and men, binding House Baratheon and House Stark in a future alliance that will serve the good of the realm." Then, a ripple of applause and murmurs spread through the hall. Some people smiled openly, a few wore guarded expressions. Ned glanced at the faces, picking out the Lannister bannerman, who observed with neutral politeness. He saw Catelyn press Sansa's hand, guiding her forward a step so the crowd could glimpse her. Sansa stood tall, though her cheeks burned red. Her eyes darted around, meeting not only approving smiles, but also curious stares. Celaena spoke then, her tone gentle but clear. "Our dear Sansa will, in time, be welcome to King's Landing to learn the ways of the court, to be prepared for her future role. I pledge that we, the royal family, shall treat her as one of our own. May this union bring prosperity and peace." The applause rose again. Ned felt it echo in his chest like a heartbeat. There was relief in it, and also a measure of uncertainty. Yet for the moment, the hall's mood seemed joyful. This was a day of promise, even if the true complexities lay just beneath. When the ceremony ended, guests drifted forward with words of congratulation. Robb approached Sansa, teasing her softly but also hugging her with genuine affection. Arya stood off to one side, arms folded, looking skeptical but not openly hostile. Bran and Rickon milled around, too young to fully understand the gravity but old enough to sense it was important. Robert and Celaena accepted well-wishers, the king's broad laughter bouncing off the rafters. Catelyn had tears in her eyes, disguised by her pride as she thanked those who praised Sansa. Ned stood quietly, watching the swirl of people. Ser Barristan Selmy stepped over, inclining his head in respect. "Congratulations, Lord Stark. An alliance worthy of song. Prince Steffon is young, but he'll learn well from the traditions of the North, I think." Ned smiled faintly. "I pray so. He'll need a firm heart to one day rule." Barristan nodded, then offered a polite goodbye and withdrew. Across the hall, Ned noticed a cluster of Lannister men conferring in low voices, led by a tall, lean knight with a crimson cloak. The man's face was unreadable as he surveyed the scene. Ned suspected they were taking mental notes to carry back to Tywin Lannister. Still, the Queen herself was a Lannister, and she had given no sign of malice. If anything, she seemed genuinely intent on forging a harmonious bond. By the time the hall began to empty, and the torches started to burn lower, Sansa had been bombarded with so many greetings that she looked overwhelmed. Ned gently steered her aside, letting her catch her breath. He spoke in a low tone. "You did well, Sansa. Are you all right?" She nodded, though her eyes were wide. "Yes, father. It's just, So much. Everyone's looking at me as if I'm already a princess. But I'm just me. He gave her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. Let them look. You'll still be Sansa Stark for quite a while yet. No one can rush time. He caught sight of Catelyn heading over to them, looking as though she wanted to wrap Sansa in a cloak of motherly protection. Go with your mother. Rest, Dight. Tomorrow will bring more questions, no doubt. Now. Sansa gave him a grateful smile and followed Catelyn out of the hall. The king and queen also departed, escorted by several guards. That left only a smattering of lords and knights milling about, finishing the last of the wine or huddling near the fires to discuss politics. Ned lingered for a moment, gazing at the dais, where a banner bearing the stag of Baratheon was draped beside the direwolf of Stark. The two sigils side by side reminded him how quickly life changed. He'd fought a war to put Robert on the throne. Now their children would unite to ensure that throne remained secure. He passed into the corridor, noticing Arya skulking by a pillar. She was peering at the receding form of Sansa and Catelyn. Ned paused, speaking softly. Arya, why are you not with the rest? She huffed. Sansa's the star of the night. No one wants me about, messing up her pretty gown with my muddy boots. There was jealousy in her tone, but also concern. Is it true she'll have to leave? Go south forever? Ned studied his younger daughter's face, so full of spirit. Not forever, but for a long time, when the time comes. She'll return to visit, and she'll always be your sister. Dandani. Arya's mouth twisted. Everyone makes a fuss about southern ways. I hate it. I'd rather she marry a good northern lord who likes sword fighting. Or else no one at all. He smiled at her candor. A marriage is more than a personal bond, especially at this level. It's about the realm, keeping peace, forging alliances. Arya blinked back tears. It's not fair. We don't get to choose, do we? Ned gently placed a hand on her head. We choose as best we can within the limits the world sets upon us. I know it's hard to understand, but Sansa made her choice in this too. She wants it. Vanduar. Arya's shoulders slumped. She exhaled, then nodded begrudgingly. Maybe. But I'll miss her. He nodded. We'll all miss her. But that's a day that may not come for years, Arya. Enjoy the time you have now. Come, let's find a warm corner. You can tell me what mischief you've been up to since sunrise. She managed a faint smile, her gray eyes reflecting her father's gentle affection. Together, they departed the dim corridor, heading toward the family chambers. Outside, the wind had begun to blow in earnest, carrying the promise of heavier snow. A pale moon hung in the sky. Winterfell's old stones creaked softly in the cold. In the following days, the official betrothal documents were drawn, witnessed by Master Luwin, Ser Barristan Selmy, and several of the northern lords. Each day was filled with small ceremonies and dinners, gatherings where lords from both the north and the westerlands pledged to uphold the new alliance. Ravens flew forth, bearing tidings to every corner of the realm. Lord Tywin would receive the news at Casterly Rock, as would the lords of the Vale and the Riverlands, ensuring that word of the Union spread wide. The realm's gossip mill no doubt chattered about the shift in power. The curious match that had once been rumored for the older Lannister daughter, now realized in a gentler, more tempered form through Celaena. Sansa spent time with Celaena each afternoon, learning the basics of southern court etiquette. Eleanor Hill introduced her to new styles of braiding, to the formal patterns of dancing expected at court balls. Sansa eagerly embraced these lessons, though at times, Ned worried she might be too quick to romanticize them. Still, Celaena seemed careful to warn her that not all was pageantry. Behind every bright curtain lurked ambition. The Queen urged Sansa to remain steady, to keep her northern honesty even as she learned the South's ways. Ned, overhearing some of these conversations from a distance, felt a faint relief that Celaena did not try to bury Sansa in illusions. Robert, meanwhile, spent his days hunting or sparring with the knights, occasionally pausing to speak with Ned about practical matters. The defenses of the North, the state of the Night's Watch, the rumors of wildling movement beyond the wall. At times he joked that once Steffan was grown and married to Sansa, the couple could be sent to hold Winterfell, if the North ever needed strong stewardship. But Ned could hear the half-serious ring to his old friend's words. Robert might well want to keep the North firmly under the Baratheon banner by placing a blood relative in charge. Still, that was decades in the future, if it ever happened at all. As the king's visit stretched on, winter's grip tightened around Winterfell. Mornings dawned with frost glistening on every surface, the breath of men and horses alike steaming into the crisp air. Fires roared in the hearths day and night, and the storerooms began to see the start of rationing protocols. Though not too strictly, as no one wanted to show poor hospitality to the royal guests. Each day, Ned and Catelyn oversaw the distribution of supplies to ensure no one went hungry. Robert admired the resilience of the North, though he often grumbled about the cold that seeped into his joints. Throughout all these days, Arya grew more restless. She vanished for hours at a time, exploring the castle's nooks, creeping onto the walls to watch the sunrise, or eavesdropping on conversations that were none of her business. It was in her nature. She showed a grudging acceptance of Sansa's betrothal, but also an undercurrent of sadness. Ned found her once in the courtyard near dawn, practicing little thrusts with a wooden stick. She pretended it was Needle, the sword she hoped to wield one day. He stood quietly by, remembering how he had once indulged her curiosity with the swordmaster in King's Landing. A memory from another timeline, perhaps, or a future yet to be realized. Here, with the Queen's retinue present, such a spectacle might only draw disapproval. One evening, as the King's party settled near the hearth after supper, Robert turned to Ned with a conspiratorial twinkle in his eye. "Ned, my friend, let us revisit those crypts of yours. You mentioned once the tomb of old King Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt. I'd like to see if it matches the stories. They say the statue stands proud even in submission." Ned in terror. Ned hesitated. The crypts were a sacred, somber place for House Stark. Typically, they did not show them off to visitors, but Robert had a strange fascination with them. Celaena seemed curious too, though she politely asked if it would be disrespectful. Ultimately, Ned agreed to lead a small party. Robert, the Queen, Catelyn, and a handful of guards with torches, down into the subterranean chambers. Sansa asked to come, but Ned gently discouraged her, knowing it might be too eerie for her sensitive heart. Arya, on the other hand, would have relished the spookiness of the crypts, but Ned suspected her wry comments might not go over well. So it was decided that only the older members would venture below. That night, torches in hand, they descended the winding steps carved into the heart of Winterfell. The flicker of flame played on damp stone walls. The air turned cool and musty. Robert had to stoop a bit in places, his broad frame nearly scraping the ancient ceiling. Celaena walked at his side, leaning close to peer into the darkness. Catelyn followed more slowly, her expression tight. She had never much liked the crypts. Down they went, until the corridor opened into a vaulted chamber lined with the stone likenesses of Stark ancestors. Each effigy sat upon a tomb, hand on a stone sword, a direwolf curled at its feet. Ned led them quietly, naming a few as they passed. Robert listened intently, half in awe, half in hushed reverence. They stopped before the tomb of Torrhen Stark. The statue portrayed a stern-faced king, carved with the details of ancient northern armor. The torchlight danced on the sword in his lap. Robert stared at it, as though measuring the man's resolve. He knelt to Aegon the Conqueror, but by doing so he saved thousands of lives, didn't he? Robert asked in a low voice. Ned nodded. So the stories say. He saw the futility of open war against dragons. The North bent the knee but kept its honor. Robert let out a breath. Sometimes bending the knee can be wise. Other times, it's the worst disgrace. The difference between sense and cowardice can be razor thin. Celaena rested a hand on his arm, and Robert gave her a small nod. They walked deeper, until they reached the more recent tombs. Ned paused at the one belonging to his father, Lord Rickard Stark, who died at the hands of the Mad King. He bowed his head, silent for a moment of remembrance. Then his gaze shifted to the empty space meant for Brandon Stark, and the tomb for Lyanna Stark. The torchlight wavered upon Lyanna's statue. Robert inhaled sharply, stepping forward. Even though Ned had sought to keep this part of the crypt from him, the memory of Lyanna drew Robert like a moth to flame. The statue, though somewhat idealized, showed her young face carved in stone, her hair flowing. A stone direwolf lay at her feet. Robert stood there, shoulders tense. Celaena watched him, expression solemn. Everyone felt the hush grow deeper. Robert's voice was hoarse. "Lyanna." He shook his head, torchlight reflecting in his eyes. "All these years I still see her face. I thought I'd have her by my side as queen, but the gods had other plans." And Ned felt the tightness in his own throat. This was the woman who had been sister to him, to Brandon, the spark that lit the fires of rebellion. He glanced at Catelyn, who watched from a short distance, giving them space. Celaena, standing near Robert, gently slipped her hand into his. He gripped it almost painfully, as if torn between present and past. Celaena spoke softly. "I wish I could have known her. I've heard many speak of her kindness and courage." Robert exhaled, chest shuddering. She was everything. Sometimes I think I've tried to find her in other faces, other people, but it isn't fair to them, or to her memory." He took a step back, blinking. "I'm sorry, Celaena." She pressed a hand to his cheek. "I understand. The past is the past, Robert. Let us honor it and move forward." Her eyes flicked to Ned. "We have a new alliance now, a new hope for the realm. Perhaps that can bring some peace to these old ghosts." Ned carefully placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. "You honor Lyanna by remembering her, Robert. She was dear to me as well, but we must not let her memory blind us to what we have now." "No." Robert nodded, swallowing. Then he let out a strained chuckle. "Gods, I didn't mean to turn this into a funeral. Let's go back up. These crypts are too cold and full of ghosts. Let's drink to the living, to Sansa's betrothal, to the future." They retraced their steps, torches flickering as they ascended. The air grew warmer with each twist of the spiral staircase, and by the time they emerged into the main keep, Robert's demeanor had shifted back to a semblance of normal. Yet Ned saw in his friend's eyes a lingering sorrow, one that might never fully leave. Celaena, for her part, remained gentle, saying little but standing close by him, a silent pillar of support. Back in the torchlit corridors, they parted ways. Robert and Celaena retreated to their chambers, with Celaena casting Ned a grateful glance, as if to say she appreciated his calm presence. Catelyn took Ned's arm, and they walked quietly to their quarters. She asked nothing, but he sensed she understood the tension that had brewed in the crypts. The past remained a powerful force. Days slipped by, each one weaving a new thread into the tapestry of the alliance. Robert murmured that they would soon need to return to King's Landing. The Queen had pressing matters of state, from trade negotiations to the unsettled business of a few rebellious lords in the Stormlands. Yet they lingered, perhaps enjoying the respite from southern intrigues, or simply reluctant to sever the newfound closeness with the Starks. On one of those final nights, the largest feast yet was held in honor of the betrothal. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted venison, fresh bread, spiced cakes, and steaming vegetables from the last harvest. Barrels of ale and mead were tapped, and the great hall shone with braziers and torches, enough to drive back any winter chill. Musicians played lively tunes, filling the space with the sound of flutes and drums. Sansa sat between her parents, glowing with a mixture of shy pride and blossoming confidence. She wore a new gown, a gift from the Queen, silk and soft lavender, trimmed with delicate silver thread. Across from her, Celaena and Robert shared a table of honor, the little prince dozing in the arms of his nursemaid nearby. Ned watched as guests raised cups to toast the betrothal. Their voices rang out, proclaiming the unity of the stag and the direwolf. He felt Catelyn's hand close over his beneath the table, a reminder that they stood together in this. Robb laughed with the knights, telling them of hunts in the Wolf's Wood. Bran and Rickon stared wide-eyed at the spectacle, occasionally sneaking bites of honeyed pastries. Arya all but vanished after the initial toasts, slipping away from the formalities, presumably to roam the castle or watch from the shadows. A hush fell when King Robert rose, cup in hand, his boisterous grin returning. "My noble lords, ladies, friends, we have eaten and drunk well these past days, but I'd not let you leave without one more hearty toast. Here's to the future princess of the Seven Kingdoms, Sansa Stark, and to my son, Prince Stefan. May their marriage bring the realm lasting peace. He drained his cup in one pull, slamming it down with a flourish. The hall erupted in cheers. Sansa blushed furiously, but her eyes shone with happiness at the acclamation. Ned glimpsed Celaena leaning over to whisper something encouraging in Sansa's ear, and Sansa nodded. A wave of gratitude washed over Ned. Perhaps, by some grace, this union would indeed be a kind one, not the kind of bitter arrangement that so often marked political marriages. Later that night, after the musicians had played until their strings threatened to snap, and the guests began to wander off in search of their beds, Ned walked Celaena and Robert to the base of the tower steps that led to their chambers. The Queen paused, glancing back at the great hall, where the echoes of laughter still lingered. She spoke quietly to Ned. "Thank you for your hospitality. It has been a blessing to see this place. I feel I understand Robert more now, and your family, they are truly good people." Robert nodded vigorously. They are. Had Ned not been so damn stubborn, I'd have kept him in King's Landing years ago as my hand. But he always preferred the north. He said it with a chuckle, though there was genuine regret behind his words. "Perhaps if the troubles in King's Landing grow more tangled, I'll call upon you again, old friend." Ned inclined his head. "Should you ever truly need me, I will come. Let's hope it does not come to that." They parted then, Robert guiding Celaena up the steps, his massive arm around her slender shoulders. Ned stood a moment, listening to their footsteps retreat. He felt the deep stir of fate weaving in unseen patterns. Sansa bound to the little prince, Robert and Celaena forging their own path, the north quietly bracing for the future. A future that might, with luck, avoid the savage conflicts of the past. At last, Ned turned and walked toward his own chambers. On the way, he found Arya perched on a windowsill in a dim corridor, staring at the moonlit courtyard. He stopped beside her, understanding her restlessness. She looked over, her dark hair framing a face that seemed older than her years in that light. "Father," she said softly, "everyone's so busy with Sansa and the Queen. I feel like a ghost in my own home." He offered her a sad smile. "Sometimes we each feel like that in a crowd. But you're no ghost. You're my daughter, a living, breathing force to be reckoned with." Ned. Arya sighed. "Will the king stay much longer?" Ned shook his head. "They'll depart in a few days, I expect." She turned her face to the window again. "Good. I'm tired of all this talk of fancy dresses and southern courts. I want things to be normal again." He gently ruffled her hair. "Normal never lasts, Arya. But life goes on, and we endure. You'll see your sister remain for a time yet, and you'll have me and your brothers to bother." He offered a little grin to coax a smile from her. She returned a half smile, then hopped down. "Good night, father." She wandered off, footsteps echoing in the cold hallway, her figure soon swallowed by shadows. Ned lingered, gazing out the window. The moon gleamed pale and distant. He traced the shape of the courtyard, the looming shape of the ancient walls. They had endured centuries of winter, and they would endure centuries more. Tonight, in that quiet watch, Ned Stark allowed himself a whisper of hope that the match between Sansa and the prince might give the realm a chance to grow stronger, to see fewer blood-soaked fields and more days of peace. Yet in the recesses of his mind, Ned knew Westeros was never far from the next storm. Politics in King's Landing could shift in an instant, roiling under the surface like the beasts that lurked in the depths of the sea. He resolved to prepare as best he could, to watch, to protect, and to wait for whatever test the future had in store. He finally turned away and made for his chamber. There, he found Catelyn waiting, already unpinning her hair. She gave him a tired but contented smile, and he crossed the room to press a tender kiss to her cheek. Without words, they sank into the comfort of each other's presence, quietly sharing the warmth the cold halls could not provide. Winter was coming, always coming. But for the moment, the fires of hope burned strong in Winterfell. And in that narrow space between uncertainty and faith, they found reason to believe in better days ahead. The next morning dawned with a sky of thin clouds and a prickling wind that whistled around Winterfell's towers. Ned emerged from the bedchamber quietly, leaving Catelyn to a few more moments of rest. The events of the past weeks pressed against his thoughts, The betrothal, Robert's unexpectedly long stay, the swirl of rumors that enveloped every corridor. He wondered how best to prepare for the king's imminent departure, which he knew would likely come soon despite Robert's fondness for the north. The matters of state in King's Landing could not be ignored forever, and Celaena had already dropped hints that the realm required their attention. He took his usual walk around the ramparts. The guards saluted, their breath pluming in the cold air. From these heights, he spied the swirling columns of smoke rising from the kitchens, the glimpses of stable boys rushing to ready horses, the silhouettes of knights in the training yard. The hush that draped Winterfell was laced with watchfulness. Everyone seemed to sense the royal visit would wrap up any day now. On the far side of the yard, Ned spotted Arya. She stood at the edge of the archery butts, practicing with a short bow that belonged to one of the squires. Her posture was unpolished, elbows sticking out, but her shots hit the target with decent consistency. A guard stood by, occasionally barking pointers. Ned lingered at the battlements, gazing down as Arya loosed arrow after arrow. She had a fierce intensity about her, an energy that refused to be shaped by southern courtesy. Watching her, Ned felt a rush of fatherly pride, and a faint worry for how the realm might respond to a girl so openly bent on pursuits few deemed ladylike. He moved on, crossing to the steep stair that led back down. At the foot of it, he encountered Maester Luwin, who carried a neat bundle of scrolls. The elderly man greeted him with a small bow, face creased with the beginnings of concern. "My lord," Luwin began, lowering his voice, "we have received a raven from Casterly Rock. It bears Lord Tywin's seal. I thought you might wish to see it before the king does." Ned resisted a sigh. "Yes, I would. Thank you, Maester." Together, they stepped into a small alcove near the courtyard. Luwin carefully unwound the scroll, revealing a brief but pointed missive in Tywin Lannister's austere handwriting. Ned read it twice. It contained formal congratulations on the betrothal, no more than a few lines, followed by a polite vow that House Lannister supported the union wholeheartedly. Yet there was a certain crispness, a dryness that suggested Tywin's true feelings might lie elsewhere. He offered no personal remarks, no mention of traveling north to witness the betrothal in person. Instead, he wrote that he awaited the king's return to King's Landing, where further details could be arranged if necessary. To Ned, the letter felt as though Tywin were withholding some deeper sentiment. He rolled the parchment back up, handing it to Luwin. "I will show this to Robert. Let us keep our eyes open. Sometimes what is not said is as telling as what is." Luwin nodded. "Indeed, my lord. I've also heard from certain Lannister knights that Lord Tywin did not expect the king to remain in the north this long. They are anxious to return south." Ned saw in Luwin's eyes a flicker of worry. Prolonged visits sometimes sparked talk of overshadowing local governance, or of neglecting the affairs of the capital. "The king has tarried for personal reasons," Ned said quietly. "But yes, I suspect they'll depart soon. Stand ready for a flurry of last-minute demands." He parted ways with Luwin, heading toward the Great Hall in search of Robert. On the way, he passed a cluster of servants who whispered excitedly about the new warmth that seemed to exist between the North and the king. Some expressed hope that this alliance would improve trade routes, lower tariffs on goods traveling south. Others gossiped about whether Sansa would remain in Winterfell a while longer, or if the queen might insist on taking her back to King's Landing immediately. Ned paused to reassure them that Sansa would not leave that instant. At least some measure of time would pass before any formal move to the capital. Entering the Great Hall, Ned found Robert finishing a breakfast of grilled fish and boiled eggs with a handful of his knights. The king had a half-empty cup of ale at his elbow, but he did not look as though he'd been drinking heavily. Celaena was absent, likely meeting with Catelyn or finalizing some letter. Robert greeted Ned with a hearty clap on the back, sending a faint jolt through him. "Ha! Ned, come sit. These southern knights of mine are complaining about the cold in your blasted castle. I told them they'd toughen up or freeze." The men chuckled nervously, well aware of the king's mood. Ned smiled politely, but felt the weight of Tywin's letter in his hand. He held it out. "A message from your lord father-in-law. Arrived not long ago." Robert's thick eyebrows rose as he snatched the scroll. He broke the seal and scanned the contents, his face unreadable. After a moment, he gave a snort. "So Tywin congratulates us, good. Doesn't say much else, does he?" "No, Your Grace," Ned replied. "He's likely waiting to discuss details once you return to the Red Keep." Robert shrugged, rolling up the scroll. "Let him wait. I'm the king. He'll do as I command. Still, it seems he's not so sour as I feared." He set the parchment aside. "Sit, Ned. There's food enough. Join us before the day's tasks." Ned complied, taking a place at the table. One of the serving girls brought him a plate of eggs and black bread. He listened as Robert chatted amiably with the knights, occasionally teasing them about the cold or praising the North's game. The mood was relaxed, though Ned sensed a subtle impatience in Robert's manner, as if he too knew the time for departure had arrived. Every so often, Robert would rub his eyes or glance at the door, as though expecting Selena to summon him for some pressing matter. When the meal ended, Robert dismissed his men and turned to Ned, dropping his voice to a lower register. "We'll be leaving in 3 days, I expect. Maybe 4 if the Queen insists on seeing more of your local villages, but I doubt it. She's told me the realm waits on no one. I can't hide here forever, tempting as it might be." Ned nodded. "I'll inform the stewards and have them ready your supplies. The roads are clear enough that you shouldn't have trouble heading south." Robert grunted in approval. Then he rose, stretching his broad arms, rolling his neck as if preparing for some trial. "Tomorrow, I want one last hunt. Something big. I'll not ride away from the north without a final taste of your beasts." Ned inclined his head, though a part of him worried about Robert's eagerness. The hunts had been frequent, and while Robert still carried the aura of a warrior, his body was not as agile as it once was. He said nothing, however, simply allowing the king his small pleasures. There would be time enough for caution in the future. They parted. Ned set about ensuring the stables and supplies were prepared. He conferred with the castle steward, the master of horse, and the head cook. He checked in with the blacksmith who had been working overtime to ensure that any repairs to the royal party's arms and armor were finished before their departure. Between tasks, he crossed paths with Robb in the courtyard, where the boy helped oversee the grooming of the king's favorite hunting horse. Robb looked determined, proud that he was trusted with a royal mount. Ned approached, smiling. "A good horse, isn't it?" Robb ran a brush down the horse's flank. Well muscled. I've grown fond of the stallion. I'll be sorry to see him go." "Namaini?" Ned patted Robb's shoulder. "You've done well, my son, both in the yard and out of it. I know the king has been pleased with your conduct." Robb glanced around, making sure no one overheard. His voice lowered. "Father, might I ride with them when they depart?" "Just for a short distance to see the world beyond Winterfell. Even if I return after a few days on the road. I want to see how the king's men travel, how the knights organize themselves." Ned understood the thirst for adventure. The boy was nearing manhood, itching to test himself in broader fields. Yet the North needed its heir at Winterfell. "I'll consider it," he said gently, "but I can't promise. If you're gone, we have fewer strong arms to protect your mother and siblings. It's only a short while, I know, but these are uncertain times." Robb's face fell slightly, but he nodded. "I understand." Ned told him to keep at his tasks, then moved on. Though it stung to deny Robb's wish, even tentatively, Ned understood that every Stark was essential in the North, especially with winter looming. Yet part of him recalled how he and Robert had once roamed free in the days of the rebellion, forging friendships that would last a lifetime. Perhaps one day, Robb would find his own path that led him beyond these walls. He found Sansa in the library tower, of all places, speaking quietly with Lady Eleanor Hill, the Queen's lady-in-waiting. They had a few books open on a table, some containing genealogies of the great houses, others describing the geography of the crownlands. Sansa looked up when Ned entered, her face glowing with eagerness. "Father," she said, "Lady Eleanor is showing me the coastline near King's Landing. I never realized just how large the city is." Ned glanced at the maps spread out across the wooden tabletop. Indeed, King's Landing sprawled along the Blackwater Rush, with walls and districts that would dwarf anything in the north. "It's quite vast," he agreed. "You'll see ships from all corners of the known world in its harbor, Sansa. Merchants come from Essos, from the Free Cities. It's a far cry from our quiet port at White Harbor." Sansa's eyes shone. "I'm trying to learn all I can before I go. When I do eventually travel south, I want to be prepared. The Queen has told me a bit of her own transition. How strange it was to move from Casterly Rock to the Red Keep. But at least she had her father's men, and now Prince Stefan is there." "Ah." Ned sensed the swirl of both anticipation and dread in his daughter's tone. He gave a slight smile, turning to Lady Eleanor. "Thank you for guiding her." Eleanor inclined her head. "I'm happy to be of help, Lord Stark. Her Grace the Queen values your daughter's education. She wants her to arrive with a sense of how the capital is laid out, so she won't feel too lost." Lenin. Ned appreciated the courtesy, but deep down he worried. However carefully they prepared Sansa, the Red Keep was a maze of intrigue. Still, he would not quell her enthusiasm. Let her dream a little longer. Reality would settle in soon enough. By the time midday arrived, a light snowfall had begun, blanketing the courtyard in gentle white. The hush of falling flakes lent an almost magical aura to Winterfell. Ned joined Catelyn in one of the covered corridors, where they looked down into the yard. She linked her arm through his, leaning against him as they watched the swirling snow. "They'll leave soon," she murmured. "Part of me is relieved. Another part is sad to see it all end." These weeks have felt like a strange festival of newness. "I almost forgot how lonely Winterfell can be when the days are dark and visitors are rare." Ned stroked her hand. "We've done our duty as hosts. They've made their betrothal arrangements. Life will return to its old patterns, though not quite the same. The North will remain, and in time, Sansa will go south. Our children are growing, Cat. We can't hold them forever." She sighed. "I know, but a mother's heart clings." They stood like that for a time, the snow drifting in gentle spirals around them. Eventually, the sky grew heavier, hinting at a more serious storm. Inside, fires were lit in every hearth, and the great hall buzzed with the promise of one final feast for the king. Robert and Selena had decided they would depart in 3 days, unless the snows made the roads impassable. If the weather held, they would head south with their full retinue. Ned oversaw the servants' flurry of preparation. Salted meats packed for travel, barrels of water readied, firewood stacked for camp. The royal wagons had to be loaded with Selena's gowns, the cradle and supplies for Prince Stefan, the gifts from various northern lords. That evening, after supper, Robert insisted on a round of drinking in the Great Hall. A modest crowd gathered, northern bannermen, a handful of Lannister knights, and even some of the garrison's officers. They listened to Robert regale them with stories of battles and hunts, sometimes glancing at the Queen to see her reaction. Selena mostly watched him with a patient smile, occasionally laughing at a well-timed jest. Ned knew Robert relished the attention, though he tried to keep his cups moderate. The memory of the crypt visit, where Robert's sorrow for Lyanna had flared, still lingered. Ned wondered if Robert drank to bury that lingering ache, or simply to savor these final nights. In one corner, Sansa sat with her mother and Lady Eleanor, sipping a cup of spiced cider. Arya, nowhere to be seen, likely lurked outside, or in one of the tower stairs. Robb and Bran exchanged jokes, while Rickon dozed in old Nan's lap. The hour grew late, and the talk grew bolder. One of the Lannister men, half drunk, began boasting of tournaments in the Westerlands. He recounted how House Lannister knights won more jousts than any other house. A few northern men bristled at the suggestion that the West was superior. Tension flickered. Ned stood, intending to quell it with a calm word. But Robert laughed loudly, diffusing the moment by claiming the men of the North had nothing to prove. They had proven themselves in a real war, not just in jousting lists. The men cheered. The Lannister knight flushed, and the conversation shifted. Much later, as the revelers drifted off to their beds, Ned and Robert walked together down the corridor. Their footsteps echoed in the hush. Robert's breath smelled faintly of ale, but he seemed far from incoherent. "You've done me a kindness, Ned," Robert said, resting an arm on Ned's shoulder, his voice echoing off the stone. "Letting me linger here, letting me see a future that might be simpler, quieter. Sometimes I wish the gods had fated me to rule only the Stormlands, not all 7 kingdoms. But no sense wishing for what can't be." "Nah." Ned offered a small smile. "We are who we are, Robert. The realm needs its king, and you have answered that call." They paused at a branching corridor, Robert's eyes flicking to the darkness beyond. "There are times I wonder if my father-in-law tries to run the kingdom behind my back. Tywin's a cunning one, but I'll not let him overshadow me. Celaena's tried to keep me from quarreling with him openly. She says he respects me in his own rigid way. Maybe so. But I know Tywin's mind is always turning." Ned nodded. "He's not a man to cross lightly. Still, you're the king. He'll bend the knee, however grudgingly." "Bem." Robert gave a lopsided grin. That he will. "Now, good night, Ned. 3 more days and we'll trouble you no longer." They parted, and Ned returned to his chambers. Catelyn had already retired, but as he entered, she stirred, asking him in a drowsy whisper if all was well. He reassured her, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. He changed into a night tunic and lay down, thoughts churning. 3 more days. Then the north would once again be still, left to its own counsel beneath the gathering snows. Sansa would remain for a while yet, but the bond was sealed. The wheels of fate turned. The next 2 days passed swiftly. The snowstorm that threatened never fully arrived, just a smattering of flakes that melted by midday. Robert took his final hunt with a small group, bagging a pair of large stags. He boasted that the crown would feast on northern venison for a fortnight as they traveled home. Celaena busied herself writing letters to be dispatched by Raven, presumably to the Red Keep and to Casterly Rock. She asked Sansa to pen a note of introduction, so that the ladies of the court would know to expect a young northern betrothed. Sansa wrote it with trembling diligence, mindful of every phrase. Ned and Catelyn looked on, noting how quickly their daughter was adopting the polished style of a future princess. Rob remained determined to ride out with the king's men at least for a short distance. Every so often he approached Ned with an earnest plea, reminding him that he was old enough to spend a few nights on the road. Returning by another route, Ned mulled it over but could not decide. Finally, the evening before the departure, he pulled Rob aside in the corridor. "You're nearly a man grown," Ned told him, resting a hand on his shoulder. "But I need you here, Rob. If trouble arises in the north, or if we must send out men to track outlaws or wildlings, someone must command them. I cannot have Winterfell left without its Stark in a time like this." "Forgive me." Rob swallowed his disappointment, forcing a nod. "I understand, Father. It's just, I feel so caged sometimes. Everyone else seems to move freely." Ned's voice softened. "The price of being heir. Responsibility weighs heavier than any chain. But your time will come." He saw the flicker of resolve in Rob's eyes as the boy bowed his head. They parted. Ned hoped Rob would come to accept that duty often wore the face of sacrifice. At last, the final morning arrived. The courtyard bustled with frenetic energy. Servants loading wagons, stable hands guiding horses into lines, knights checking their harnesses and bedrolls. The rising sun tinted the sky a wintry gold. A crisp coldness clung to the air, but at least the wind lay still. Catelyn stood on the steps to see the king and queen off. By her side, Sansa, Arya, and the younger children waited in varying states of emotion. Arya looked relieved to see the Southerners go, while Sansa dabbed at her eyes. Sadness mingled with anticipation. Rob stood with them, wearing the expression of a young lord who knew this day was important. Robert emerged from the keep, clad in traveling leathers trimmed with fur. His sword hung at his side, and he wore a cloak embroidered with the stag of Baratheon. Celaena walked beside him, her cloak a deep crimson, lined with white fox fur. In her arms she carried the infant prince, bundled tight against the cold. A nurse waited to relieve her of the baby once they were on the road, but for this moment, Celaena seemed to want to keep him close. Ned stepped forward to greet them. Robert clasped him in a firm embrace, voice booming. Ned, my dear friend, will always remember this visit. We'll send word the moment we're safely returned to the capital. Don't let your swords grow rusty up here, eh? Ned smiled. We'll keep them sharp, I assure you. Travel safely, Robert Baratheon. Now. Celaena turned to Catelyn and Sansa, inclination of her head graceful. Thank you for the hospitality. Lady Stark, I shall always recall your warmth. Sansa, my sweet, keep studying as we discussed. In time, we'll welcome you at the Red Keep with open arms. Sansa curtsied. Yes, your grace. I'll do my best to learn quickly. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she maintained a composed smile. Celaena reached out and briefly touched Sansa's cheek, almost like a fond aunt might, then handed Prince Stefan to the nurse so she could properly wrap her own cloak. The last goodbyes flitted through the frosty air. Rickon clung to Catelyn's skirts, confused about why so many fancy people were leaving all at once. Bran waved shyly to the knights he'd befriended. Arya stood apart, giving only the faintest bow of her head when Robert's gaze flicked to her. Robert chuckled, shaking his head, no doubt reminded of Lyanna's wild spirit. Robb offered a respectful farewell, receiving a rough clap on the shoulder from Robert, who told him to keep the North strong. At last, the horn sounded, signaling the procession's departure. Horses snorted and pawed at the snow-packed ground. Guards in gold-trimmed cloaks led the way, followed by wagons creaking under supplies and personal effects. Robert and Celaena took their positions near the front, surrounded by a cluster of knights. The nurse carrying Prince Stefan rode in a comfortable carriage just behind them. Banners bearing the stag and lion sigil fluttered overhead, a swirl of color against the pale sky. They passed through the great gates of Winterfell, which stood wide to accommodate the caravan. Ned and his family watched from the courtyard steps as the royal train snaked out onto the King's Road, eventually vanishing beyond the snow-laden trees. Only the ruts in the road and the faint echo of hooves remained. As the sound faded, a hush descended. It seemed almost unreal that the king and queen were gone, leaving behind only the memory of colorful feasts, hunts, and whispered negotiations. Sansa lingered, staring at the gates long after the last wagon disappeared. Catelyn touched her arm gently, and they went back inside together. With the departure, a new stillness settled over Winterfell. The halls seemed wider and emptier, the echoes more pronounced. Servants rushed to restore normal order, cleaning guest chambers and storing leftover provisions. The great hall felt different without Robert's laughter reverberating off the stone walls. Even the dire wolves padded about more quietly, as if sensing the shift. In the days that followed, Sansa threw herself into lessons with renewed intensity. She spent hours with Maester Luwin, learning not only reading and writing, but also the finer points of correspondence and etiquette. She asked countless questions about life in the capital, about the different houses that formed the King's Council. Ned watched her efforts with mingled pride and sorrow. Each question she asked, each subtle mannerism she practiced, brought her one step closer to leaving the North. Catelyn, for her part, tried to maintain a brave front, but Ned noticed a slight tremble in her hands when she spoke of Sansa's future. She confided in him late one evening that she feared losing another child to the south. Bran went south once, before he was even old enough to remember, she said quietly. Now Sansa will go too, and the Red Keep is not always kind. I've heard stories. Ned stroked her hair. We'll protect her as best we can. The Queen gave us her word, and Robert has always been my friend. He paused, letting the unspoken truth settle, that a king's friend might still be swayed by courtiers and the demands of power. Meanwhile, Arya drifted into her own pursuits, occasionally sneaking into the training yard or practicing archery in hidden corners. She no longer complained openly about Sansa's betrothal, but her eyes held a lingering resentment. Once, Ned encountered her in the old armory, rummaging through a chest of dusty practice swords. She glanced up guiltily, as though caught in wrongdoing. He said nothing, merely studying her. Arya gripped a light wooden blade, her posture braced. I just want to learn, she muttered defensively. Ned exhaled. I know. Come. He took a few careful steps, choosing a sword for himself, a practice blade that wouldn't do real harm. He guided Arya in a simple routine he remembered from childhood. Block, parry, retreat, thrust. She followed eagerly, each move tinged with a raw enthusiasm. If someone had walked in at that moment, they might have questioned the Lord of Winterfell for training a daughter in the sword. Yet in that dusty armory, father and child found common ground. For a few minutes, the outside world vanished. No betrothals, no alliances, just the syncopated rhythm of wood striking wood. When they finished, Arya's cheeks were flushed. She lowered her makeshift sword, breathing hard. "Thank you," she said. He smiled, setting the practice blade aside. "Don't speak of it to your septa. She'll have my head." Arya grinned. Let her try. They parted with that small spark of mischief intact. Ned sensed that Arya would continue seeking such lessons, no matter the obstacles. Perhaps in time they would have to find a more discreet solution. Over the next weeks, life in Winterfell fell back into a familiar pattern. Lords and merchants visited with their usual requests and reports. The approach of winter brought an increased focus on storing grain and salted meats, ensuring the castle could weather any extended storms. Occasionally, ravens arrived with updates from the south. One message, from the Queen herself, confirmed that they had reached the outskirts of King's Landing safely. She wrote that Prince Stefan had borne the journey well, that Robert was in reasonable spirits, and that the capital was abuzz with the news of the betrothal. Her words were polite, but carried no hint of trouble. Still, Ned read between the lines and sensed the swirl of court intrigues already forming around Sansa's future. A week later, a more formal letter came from Robert, sealed with the royal stag. In it, he thanked Ned once again for his hospitality, and said that Tywin Lannister had indeed greeted the news with outward acceptance, if not particular warmth. Robert invited Ned and his family to attend a grand tournament planned for the following year, in honor of Prince Stefan's second name day. The letter spoke of feasts, jousts, archery contests, and the crowning of the Queen of Love and Beauty, an event that triggered old memories in Ned, reminding him of the tourney at Harrenhal so many years ago. He suppressed a shudder at the recollection of how that had ended up fueling the tensions that led to war. Nevertheless, Robert's invitation was a sign that the new alliance would be put on display before the entire realm. Sansa might well be presented publicly as the future bride of the prince. Ned could picture the squires and knights from Dorne, the Reach, the Vale, all descending on King's Landing to witness the spectacle. It would be a statement of power, a reminder that the Baratheon Lannister line still commanded the loyalty of the Seven Kingdoms, especially now that House Stark was tied to them. Catelyn, upon reading the letter, set it aside with a measured sigh. A tournament is a grand stage. They'll want to show Sansa in all her northern finery, no doubt. She'll be displayed as a future queen for all to see. Ned nodded. I expect so. It might be wise for us to attend, to demonstrate our commitment. But it's no small journey. Robb, standing nearby, looked intrigued at the mention of the tournament. Ned glanced at him, reading the eagerness in his eyes. Perhaps this would be the chance to introduce Robb to the wide realm. But the time to make that decision could come later. For now, they had to prepare for what the next few months held. Winter was at their doorstep, and the roads might not be truly open again for long-distance travel until spring. Days lengthened into weeks, and the heavy snows finally arrived. Mornings found Winterfell blanketed under thick drifts. The swirling winds howled at night, rattling shutters and forcing the inhabitants to huddle close to the castle's internal fires. The direwolves roamed the courtyard at times, their howls echoing through the gloom. In those long nights, Ned sometimes woke with a start, dreaming of old battles or hearing faint voices from the crypts. But he would find Catelyn at his side, and the warm presence of their family kept him anchored. Meanwhile, Sansa continued her studies. Maester Luwin guided her through the basics of political alliances, explaining which houses might become her friends or adversaries in King's Landing. She practiced her handwriting diligently, penning letters to Selena Lannister, who occasionally responded with tidbits of court gossip. Through these correspondences, Sansa learned that Grand Maester Pycelle doted on Prince Stefan, that Lord Varys had expressed interest in the new alliance, and that Sir Jaime Lannister had returned from a tour of the Westerlands, though he barely spoke of the betrothal. These details intrigued Sansa, firing her imagination about the city's complex tapestry of personalities. At times, Ned took Sansa aside to caution her. "Don't believe every flattering word, Sansa. Court is full of those who smile while hiding knives. If you walk among them, walk with care." She would nod earnestly, but Ned saw how her eyes still lit at the thought of dancing in the Red Keep's torchlit halls. He could not bear to crush that innocent hope. Even as he tried to temper it with wisdom, let her keep some measure of her gentle faith in the songs. Life would test her soon enough. One snowy afternoon, a small group of travelers arrived at Winterfell's gate, seeking shelter. Among them was a bard from the Riverlands who played a high harp and sang ballads of ancient heroes. Word spread that he was quite talented, so Ned invited him to perform in the Great Hall that evening. It had been weeks since the last grand celebration, and some music might lift everyone's spirits amid the cold. The bard accepted, grateful for the chance to earn his keep. That night, under torch and candle glow, the bard plucked sweet tunes from the harp, weaving old stories of noble knights, tragic queens, and love lost or found. The lords and ladies of Winterfell, fewer in winter, but still a decent number, listened with rapt attention. Even Arya, typically restless, crept in from the back to hear the music. At one point, the bard sang a haunting melody about the Stark line of ancient kings who faced the long night. His voice quivered with emotion, echoing against the walls. Ned watched Sansa as she listened, tears shining in her eyes. The piece spoke of duty and sacrifice, and how love could bind houses together in times of darkness. When it ended, the great hall fell silent for a few heartbeats, as though the music lingered in the air like a living thing. Then applause broke out, and the bard inclined his head, smiling at the appreciation. As the hall cleared later, Sansa approached Ned. "I feel I understand a bit better," she said softly, her cheeks still flushed with the glow of the music. "This betrothal isn't just about me. It's about our house, about hope for the realm. Isn't that what the songs say? That alliances forged with honest hearts can save people from harm." Ned rested a hand on her shoulder, remembering how often songs proved simpler than the real battles. Yet he couldn't bring himself to extinguish the light in her eyes. "They do say that, my sweet girl. And sometimes, perhaps they're right." She nodded, a small hopeful smile curving her lips. Then she slipped away, presumably to dream of the future she was swiftly marching toward. The snows persisted, and winter sank deeper. Ravens brought occasional tidings. Mace Tyrell was preparing for a grand feast in Highgarden. The Iron Islands were restless but not openly rebellious. The Vale remained quiet under young Lord Robert Arryn and his mother, Lysa Tully. Each fragment of news drifted through Winterfell's halls, overshadowed by the daily tasks of stoking fires, mending clothes, and preserving food. The North locked down in its usual routine for winter. It was at the tail end of one such frigid day that a second letter arrived from Celaena. Sansa, as was now her habit, went to Maester Luwin's chambers to assist in reading the southern script. The Queen's words carried a warmth that transcended the cold. She spoke of the king's intention to hold a small private ceremony in the Red Keep after the new year, presenting Steffan as the heir in a formal capacity. It would be a gathering for key lords and ladies, not a massive event like the tournament. In this smaller circle, Sansa's betrothal might also be recognized with the signing of additional royal documents. Celaena suggested that if Ned Stark was willing, Sansa could journey south just for that short ceremony, then return to Winterfell if it was decided she was not yet ready to stay. The letter was polite, leaving open the possibility that Sansa might remain in the north until she was older. But Celaena's hope was clear, that Sansa be introduced to the capital sooner rather than later, so she might acclimate over time. Ned read the letter carefully, brow furrowed. He could almost hear Robert's loud voice echoing in the background. "Best to get her used to the court, Ned. She's to be my daughter by law one day." The idea of sending Sansa into the swirling pit of the Red Keep so soon set his teeth on edge. But the letter was phrased so graciously, acknowledging his paternal concerns. He brought it to Catelyn, who read it with parted lips, color draining from her face. "She wants Sansa to come now, in the middle of winter." Catelyn shook her head. "The roads are passable, but it would be a dangerous journey." Unless we wait until early spring. But by then, who knows how the politics might shift. The Queen's suggestion seems quick. Ned nodded grimly. We could refuse, or at least postpone. But that might strain the King's patience. They've announced the betrothal. The realm will expect progress. They weighed the risks. Sansa, still only 11, traveling all that way, possibly exposed to the complexities of the capital, while she was still so young. Catelyn's eyes brimmed with tears. She's my little girl, Ned. I know she's to be a princess, but can't we keep her a while longer? Ned pulled her close, letting her rest her cheek against his chest. He smelled the faint lavender in her hair, felt her trembling. We could suggest she wait until next year. By then, the roads would be safer and she'd be older. But if the Queen insists it's urgent, we risk offense. Catelyn's grip on his tunic tightened. What if you escorted her, traveled with a proper guard, saw her safe to King's Landing, stayed a few weeks to ensure she's settled? I can manage Winterfell with Robb. I've done it before, when you went to pay respects to the King. At least that way, Sansa wouldn't be alone. He considered this. It was not an outlandish idea. Robert had once wanted Ned to come south to be Hand of the King years ago, but Ned refused, preferring to remain in the north. Now might be a compromise. A temporary journey, giving Ned time to oversee Sansa's introduction. But the north in deep winter was precarious to leave behind. Then again, Robb was nearly 16, with Sir Roderick, Maester Luwin, and other loyal men to guide him. Perhaps it could be done. I'll write back to the Queen, he said slowly, explaining that we need to weigh the weather and gather enough men to ensure safe passage. If we go, it must be soon, or we'll risk even harsher snows on the road. Let's see how she responds. Yeah. They agreed. Ned penned a cautious but courteous reply, stating that he was honored by the invitation but must confirm that it was truly feasible to travel. He added that if the road conditions permitted, he would escort Sansa personally. He sealed it with the direwolf sigil and had it dispatched that very evening. When Sansa heard of this plan, her reaction was a mix of excitement and trepidation. "I go now in the snow?" she asked, hands nervously clasped. "But that means I could see the Red Keep by the new year, and Prince Stefan, and the Queen, but I might not be ready for all that." Ned knelt so he could look her in the eye. "If we go, I'll be by your side, and if it proves too daunting, we'll come back, I promise you." "The Queen said you can return here afterward if it's deemed wise." She nodded, swallowing. "Yes, Father. I suppose I'm excited." Yet beneath her words, he sensed the swirl of fear. She was still so young, still longing for the security of home. But the die had been cast the day Robert and Celaena proposed the match. Now, they had to see it through. While they waited for Celaena's response, Winterfell prepared just in case. Sir Roderick began selecting men-at-arms who could form a protective escort. They gathered supplies suitable for a lengthy journey in uncertain weather, heavy furs, extra dried food, enough horses and mules to handle deep drifts. The blacksmith inspected wagon wheels, ensuring they were reinforced. Robb, though disappointed he would not accompany them, threw himself into helping Sir Roderick plan the route. Arya watched from the sidelines, her expression unreadable. Once Ned found her in the courtyard, glaring at the wagons. "Why does Sansa get to go on an adventure?" she asked in a sullen tone. Ned let out a soft sigh. "It's not exactly an adventure, Arya. She's being sent to the court to stand beside the prince. You'd hate every minute of the formal receptions and embroidered gowns." Arya kicked at a patch of snow. "Maybe I would, but at least it's different. Here, it's the same lessons, the same scolding about posture and stitches. It's all so dull." Ned ruffled her hair. "Your time will come. You won't always be caged by these walls. But Sansa's path is not one you'd wish to walk. Believe me. Enjoy your freedoms while you have them." She said nothing more, merely gazing at the loaded wagons before turning on her heel and stalking away. Ned watched her go, a pang in his chest for both daughters. One yearning for wide horizons, the other about to be thrust into a world she could hardly imagine. At last, a raven arrived bearing Celaena's seal. Her letter was succinct yet warm, welcoming the idea of Ned escorting Sansa, promising them a suite of rooms in the Red Keep, and assuring them the roads near King's Landing were still clear. She added that the lords who ruled the lands between the Neck and the capital would be alerted to offer them hospitality if needed. It felt like a final green light for the journey. Ned called a meeting in his solar with Catelyn, Robb, and Sir Roderick. They charted out the route. South through Moat Cailin, then across the Neck into the Riverlands, eventually following the King's Road all the way to the city. Ned decided they would aim to reach the capital in about 4 weeks, allowing time for slow progress in bad weather. Once there, they would stay for perhaps a month or two, long enough for the ceremony and to gauge Sansa's acclamation, then return to Winterfell by early spring. That was the plan, at least on paper. Robb promised to manage affairs at Winterfell with Catelyn's oversight. Sir Roderick would remain behind, ensuring the garrison was well disciplined. Instead, Ned would take 20 good men, including Harwin and a few other seasoned riders. For a maester's presence, they would rely on the castle maesters in the towns they passed. It was not ideal, but traveling with too large a group in winter could be unwieldy. As the day of departure approached, Sansa spent hours packing the trunk of dresses and personal effects she might need. She included some simpler northern gowns, but also a few newly made pieces, more suited to southern climates. Arya wandered in and out, occasionally offering barbed remarks. "You'll roast in those furs down there? Or, I bet they won't even have decent bread." All fancy nonsense, but Sansa took her words in stride, too preoccupied to argue. Catelyn hovered, checking if Sansa had enough warm stockings, enough writing parchment. Ned watched them with a twinge of sorrow, well aware that this would be the first real separation of mother and daughter. The morning of their planned departure dawned cold and bright. A soft layering of fresh snow covered the courtyard, making it glisten in the early light. Ned and his escort gathered near the gates, leading a small caravan of horses and a single supply wagon. One of the more comfortable carriages had been pulled out for Sansa's use, though Ned suspected she might prefer horseback when the roads allowed. Catelyn and the other children stood by to bid them farewell. Arya's expression was a conflicted mix of envy and quiet sadness. Robb stood tall, trying to look mature and capable in his father's absence. Bran and Rickon clung to Catelyn, wide-eyed. Sansa wore a heavy cloak trimmed with white fur, her hood framing her face. She shivered, though whether from the cold or nerves, Ned couldn't say. She glanced around, blinking back tears as she realized this was truly happening. When the moment came for final goodbyes, she embraced each sibling in turn. Arya stared at her with a strange intensity, then gave her a quick, fierce hug. "Come back," Arya whispered. Sansa swallowed hard, nodded, then moved to Catelyn. Their embrace lasted the longest. Catelyn whispered reassurances, tears glistening on her cheeks. Ned stood by, letting them have this moment. Then he gently placed a hand on Sansa's shoulder. "We must go." He exchanged a final look with Catelyn, an unspoken vow that he would keep their daughter safe. She nodded, her eyes heavy with emotion. And so they mounted up. Sansa climbed into the carriage with the help of a guard, settling onto the cushioned seat. Ned took his horse, a sturdy northern mare, and guided it alongside. The gates creaked open, revealing the snowy path beyond. With a wave to his family, Ned urged his horse forward. The small column of riders and wagons inched out of Winterfell's protective walls. They rode south. The sky, a wide bowl of gray-white. The trees stood cloaked in frost, and the wind whispered through bare branches. Every crunch of hoof on snow echoed in the quiet. Ned glanced back once, seeing the dark towers of Winterfell receding. He carried a weight of responsibility and a faint spark of anticipation. It had been years since he traveled so far from home, and never had he done so under these circumstances, escorting his young daughter to the seat of royal power, to begin the path toward a future as queen. Sansa, peering out from the carriage window, gazed at the passing landscape, cheeks flushed from the cold. Ned wondered if she was picturing the grand illusions she once dreamed. Shining nights, golden halls, easy friendships. He silently prayed that reality would not crush those hopes too quickly. So the column pressed on, leaving deep ruts in the snowy road. Behind them, Winterfell's gates closed slowly, as though reluctant to let them go. In the months to come, the North would slumber beneath drifts, while Ned and Sansa ventured into a realm of courtly dances and subtle intrigues, of lion and stag, far from the stark shadows of home. Through it all, Ned resolved to stand by Sansa's side, to guard her future, even if it meant walking into the labyrinth of King's Landing once more. For the North endured, as it always did. But for House Stark, a new chapter had begun.